When Joel Rifkin crashed onto their radar, law enforcement had no idea how big the case would become.
We arrested the serial killer with the body in his car, and then it expanded from there.
New York State Police Captain Walter Heesh found himself leading the investigation into more than a dozen potential homicides.
The investigation stretched for many, many months. We had to corroborate his account of the many bodies that he dumped.
Nothing about Joel Rifkin had warned the world of the evil he was capable of. Retired detective Robert Mladinich briefly went to college with Rifkin and would later visit him behind bars to learn more about the enigmatic killer.
Joel didn't incrementally develop into a serial killer. There was no history of mindless vandalism as a child. There was no history of him torturing insects or bugs or frogs.
He was just this rather listless, uncertain, unhappy loner.
From a quiet, unpopular child to one of America's most notorious murderers, Joel Rifkin's story is seared into the memory of the investigators who brought him to justice.
The state police wasn't looking for a serial killer. The serial killer found us.
This killer's story begins in New York City. Joel David Rifkin was born on the 20th of January, 1959.
He was born to college students who weren't married and couldn't provide for him.
He was put up for adoption almost immediately.
Rifkin went to the home of a childless couple called Bernard and Jean Rifkin, who lived in Long Island. They were in fact to adopt a second child about 3 years later.
The father was a draftsman or an engineer. The mother had a master's degree, which was very unusual for the 1950s.
Rifkin's early life with his adopted parents and younger sister was trouble-free.
He was loved, he was close to his parents. Parents were very attentive to the children. Joel grew up going on vacations with his family.
The family lived in the affluent commuter town of East Meadow on Long Island, about 32 miles from downtown Manhattan.
Oh, it's a nice rural area in Nassau County. Very nice neighborhood.
As Rifkin moved through his school life, he began to hit roadblocks.
He went to local public schools. His parents were very focused on education, but to their disappointment, Joel was never a good student. He always struggled in school. Later on, it was learned that he was dyslexic, but that wasn't something back then that there was a lot of information on.
His father was a really brilliant man and would spend hours with him trying to teach him the rudiments of math and then kind of throw his hands up and express frustration. That was a source of great anxiety for Joel.
Parental disappointment wasn't all Rifkin had to contend with as he moved into his teenage years.
High school was very difficult for him. He was really bullied. They thought he was an oddball. They called him a freak. He had a nickname of the Turtle because he was sort of slow-moving and sort of had a stooped appearance. He sat alone at lunch. They pelted him with eggs. When he joined the cross-country track team, they would hide his running gear. They were really quite cruel.
Joel would stay at school after school was over until the very last minute. And then he would purposely take this circuitous way home, like through the woods, through backyards, to limit the risk of running into potential bullies. So even at that young age, as a sort of a survival mechanism, he was forced to be stealth-like and sneaky. I think it's pretty well proven that, incessant bullying over the years, the steady degradation, humiliation, just wreaks havoc on your emotional development. It make you hateful, resentful, self-loathing.
Around the age of 14 came another experience that Rifkin would later tell Robert Mladinich had been formative.
The earliest sexual fixation he recalls was he saw a 1973 Alfred Hitchcock movie called Frenzy. And in that movie, it is a serial killer, very urbane, dashing, handsome guy. He's going around London and he's seducing women, and then he strangles them with neckties. And Joel said that all of his domination scenes in that movie really riveted him in a sexually charged way.
The strangulation and the suffering of the victim may have played into kind of misogynistic and paraphilias that he already had. Maybe that film inserted the seed of strangulation as a particular part of his ritual.
He admits that every woman he was ever with, from the first one, when he was 17, 18 years old, to the last one, he fantasized about killing.
There have been studies that show that a lot of times serial killers will harbor these violent sexual fantasies for about 10 to 15 years before actually acting on it. And it seems that the timing sort of lines up for Joel Rifkin.
Unpopular with the girls he met at school, in his late teens, Joel Rifkin sought out his first intimate experience with a sex worker. Very quickly, the young man developed a taste for illicit liaisons.
He was in charge of the whole transactional aspect of soliciting a prostitute, deciding which one you wanted, being able to determine what sex act he wanted.
Having struggled through high school, Joel Rifkin graduated in 1977 and enrolled at Nassau Community College.
After high school, his parents really pushed him to go to college. That was very important to them. He did go for a little while, dropped out, tried different things.
After a couple of semesters, 18-year-old Rifkin left the college to attend an institution over 300 miles away near Rochester.
We were both attending Rockport State College in upstate New York. We were both journalism students.
Robert met Joel Rifkin in October 1979, when the college photography club recommended their most promising member.
I had received my first paid assignment to cover a boxing match, and I needed a photographer to accompany me. He seemed kind of rumpled and shaggy-haired, kind of nerdy, a little insecure, but extremely talented, very intelligent. Joel wound up getting lots of really great photos.
For a couple of months, Robert felt like his new friend had a glorious future mapped out. What he did not realize was that 20-year-old Rifkin had another passion that was consuming his attention.
He did have a fixation with prostitutes. He was traveling into Rochester and spending any available money he had on prostitutes.
Rifkin's continued obsession affected not only his college work, but also his personal relationships.
Joel had a girlfriend in college. She adored him. She thought he was fantastic. One of the reasons that he broke up was because he was so fixated on the type of sex that he would obtain from prostitutes, where he would be completely in charge. He would say, do this, do that. It would be over in a matter of minutes, and then he would go on his way. And that was what he wanted in his personal relationship. He didn't know how to be more emotionally connected or even physically connected with a woman that he was living with.
In December 1979, Joel Rifkin left the campus to go home for Christmas and never returned.
I never saw Joel again. I always wondered what he was up to and assumed he was doing kind of grand things in the photography world.
Robert's dreams for his friend's career could not have been further from reality. The next time Joel Rifkin made the headlines, it would be for all the wrong reasons. After dropping out of college, Joel Rifkin spent the early 1980s living back with his parents on Long Island, drifting between jobs.
He started a landscaping business, and his mother at that point was excited about it, hoping that this was going to be an avenue for him. But it really didn't take off. He was not very focused on it, didn't do such a good job. People just never called him back.
In 1986, Rifkin's father, Bernard, became gravely unwell.
His father is diagnosed with cancer. Rifkin is still desperate to impress him and signs up for a course on biology, but his father is lost to the world.
In 1987, his father was in so much pain, he actually committed suicide. He wrote a letter to Joel, his sister, and his wife saying that he was so sorry, but that he just couldn't take the pain anymore.
Devastated by his father's death, 28-year-old Rifkin dropped out of college once again. He returned to being an unreliable would-be landscape gardener with other things on his mind.
As soon as he got money, he would just be fixated on spending it on a prostitute. So he was always in debt, he was always in arrears, he was always borrowing money from his mother. And that was literally all he was concerned with, was getting enough to go into the city from Long Island to do what he would call the stroll patrol.
He spends hours driving round.
And many nights he would just look. It was like a fetish for him, just to look, observe. He liked to stop and talk to them and act like he was interested and then drive away. So that was all part of the power components of his actions.
A couple of months after his father's death, Joel Rifkin fell foul of the law in Nassau County.
In the early summer of 1987, Rifkin falls into a sting conducted by the police in which he propositions an undercover police officer for sex, and he's fined.
In the 1980s, sex work was on the rise in New York City, in part due to the influx of highly addictive crack cocaine.
In the 80s and the early 90s, there was a crack epidemic in New York City.
That resulted in a pretty significant rise in crime, everything from petty theft by the addicts to feed their habits. And then we got into the crack wars between the dealers seeking to establish territory to supply drugs. So that resulted in quite a few homicides.
There were literally over 2,000 murders a year back in the late 1980s, early 1990s. So there was literally like 7 murders a day. Nearly all of them were drug-related.
In amongst all of the violence were vulnerable women who'd been sucked into the world of substance abuse.
A lot of these women had become addicted to crack, and they just would do anything to get a fix. And that's how they ended up at prostitution.
It was against this backdrop of sex work and daily violence that Lieutenant Arthur Hawker of the New York State Police was called to the discovery of a woman's body in the Cornwall area in October 1991.
Cornwall is very close to the city of Newburgh. Where the victim was found there, it was along a creek called Moodna Creek. It was kind of like a very wooded area. It was almost like a dumping area for, people that just wanted to discard various things. She wasn't buried.
The remains were decomposed and no cause of death was discernible. There was nothing on the body to help identify the young woman.
There's a lot of variables involved in identifying a Jane Doe. You're checking missing persons with that height, weight, race, gender, scars, marks, tattoos, piercings, blood type. We would have gone to the city of Newburgh and compared photos with their detectives. Did they have any missing people?
There were no clues. It wasn't even certain the woman had been the victim of a homicide. As autumn turned to winter, the trail went cold. The following spring, 33-year-old gardener Joel Rifkin was still living in East Meadow, Long Island, with his mother and sister. His life was a secretive one.
Later on, when they interviewed his mother, she said he just came and went. They never checked up on him, didn't know what he was doing.
Rifkin still dabbled in gardening, keeping his equipment in the family garage.
His mother and his sister were forbidden from going into that garage. They never asked why, just like they were forbidden from going into his room at home.
In the late spring of 1992, Lieutenant Hawker was called to the scene of another suspicious death, this time in the Putnam County area of New York State.
On May 25th, 1992, the partially nude female body was located off a secondary road from Interstate 84, and this was close to the state of Connecticut border. And as a result of that, there was concern that she was not a local, and the local sheriff's office asked the state police.
In her late teens, Anna's life had taken a wrong turn. She'd become addicted to drugs, was homeless, and had resorted to sex work.
Anna's mother remembers that her daughter just struggled to get clean. She had a child that the mother was raising, and she would come and visit once a month to pick up her Social Security check. And I remember the mother saying that she always knew that if Anna didn't arrive on the 3rd of the month, then she was never coming back, because she came for the money and the money was going to go for drugs.
That month, July 1992, the bodies of 3 more young women were found in New York City's rivers and canals. All were badly decomposed, none were identifiable. Police assumed the murders were drug-related. 4 months later, another woman was found in a New York river.
Jenny Soto's body washed up in November 1992 in a Harlem waterway. She was wearing only a t-shirt when she was found.
Jenny Soto lived in Brooklyn, and she had a big family and was very close to them. She had younger siblings. She used to tell them, don't do drugs, don't even drink, because once you drink, you'll smoke pot and then you'll just keep continuing. But sadly, she didn't follow her own advice and ended up with a boyfriend that introduced her to drugs, and she became a drug addict. And then ultimately started working as a prostitute to support her habit. But Jenny Soto really had dreams. She wanted to be a dancer. She had a group that she was rehearsing with, and she talked a lot about it. She really wanted to make something of herself.
An autopsy showed that though Jenny had fought her attacker, leaving his skin under her fingernails, her killer had succeeded in strangling her to death before pushing her off a cliff into the Harlem River.
No one knew who killed Jenny Soto, and the family went to the police multiple times and said that they felt that the police didn't care because they just wrote her off. She was a prostitute, and they just didn't take her case seriously.
Despite the discovery of so many women murdered and dumped in bodies of water around the city, no one linked the deaths.
Nobody was saying, we have a serial killer on the loose.
Back then, there was not a lot of computer interaction between the 5 boroughs of New York City. Today, an instant connection would be made. But back then, if something happened in the Bronx or Manhattan, Staten Island, Brooklyn, Queens, there was no linkage between them.
The killings joined the long list of unsolved murders plaguing New York. But just a few months later, a routine traffic stop would lead to a high-speed chase which would take a macabre turn, blowing the cold cases wide open. At 3:15 a.m. on the 28th of June 1993, two troopers from the New York State Police were on patrol on Long Island's Southern State Parkway.
The troopers were on the parkway early morning hours, and they spotted a vehicle with no license plate on the back. They activated the lights and siren. He failed to comply and took him on a pursuit throughout Nassau County.
An enormous high-speed chase follows. Other police cars are summoned. It goes on for about 25 minutes. Finally, he loses control on a bend, and the truck goes straight into a streetlight and comes to a grinding halt.
The driver was swiftly removed from the vehicle.
They asked him for his license and registration and told him he had no license plate on the car.
The driver identified himself as 34-year-old Joel David Rifkin. As the troopers prepared to impound the vehicle, they quickly realized the missing license plate was not the only thing wrong.
One of the troopers noticed a strong emanating odor of decaying flesh in the back of the vehicle. They went to investigate, and they found the body of a female in partial decomposition wrapped in a blue tarp. He was placed under arrest and brought back to the state police headquarters in Farmingdale.
Walter Heesh, then captain of the Bureau of Criminal Investigation with the New York State Police, was called in to lead the investigation into the suspected homicide.
Rifkin said that she was a prostitute he had picked up 4 days before. He had sex with her, and things went bad, and then he killed her.
Police officers were struck by their suspect's unusual demeanor as he gave his version of events.
I remember going to the headquarters and stopped by the squad room where he was secured. He showed a detached concern. He wasn't excited at all about this. It was just a matter-of-fact type of guy right there.
Joel Rifkin told investigators he'd been driving his mother's car when he picked up the young woman on the night of the 24th of June.
She was in Manhattan on Canal Street downtown, and Joel Rifkin pulled up and she got in his car.
He knew her because he had dated her, in quotes, a number of times.
After strangling the young woman in his car, Rifkin said he'd driven home to his mother's house. He wrapped the body in a tarpaulin and put it in the trunk before driving his oblivious mother to work. Once back home, he moved the woman's body yet again.
He takes the body out of the boot of his mother's car and puts her in the garage in a wheelbarrow. The body is left for 3 days.
Rifkin spent the rest of the weekend fixing his truck and spending time with his mother and sister. By 3 o'clock on Monday morning, he had a plan.
Rifkin takes the body, now decomposing, and puts it in the boot of his truck.
He was on his way to dispose of her in a trash receptacle, which was near our state police headquarters.
Apprehended before he could hide the evidence of his crime, Rifkin was charged with second-degree murder. But the story did not end there.
The interview continued on, and at one point the investigator came to me and advised me, I think he's done this more than one time.
When they began asking him more questions, he just started naming names of all the women he could remember and going through the list.
During 10 hours of questioning, Joel Rifkin stunned detectives when he claimed to have murdered 17 women over the course of 2 or 3 years. If true, it would have made him New York's most prolific serial killer.
I was astonished. When I went in that morning, I thought we had a open and shut homicide case. And then by the afternoon, it was one of the biggest cases we've ever had.
Rifkin explained to detectives how the killing spree had begun back in 1989.
He picks up a girl, she's 25, and she's known as Susie to her fellow sex workers. Rifkin takes her back to his mother's house. His mother's away, out of town.
It got violent. He brutally murdered her and dismembered her and scattered her body in different parts of New Jersey and New York.
He put the head in a paint tin and took it to the wooded section of a golf course. He then dropped the legs in a different place in water.
16 months later, he did it again, killing a young woman called Julie Blackbird. By his third killing in July 1991, Rifkin had developed a murderous routine, which he'd repeat every few weeks or months, driving around the city, selecting his victims.
He'd pick them up, have sex, and then they would get violent, and then he would kill them. And then he'd have to dispose of them.
In the early days, he would dismember them. Later on, he decided that was too messy, he told investigators. So then he would just take the bodies and dump them in various places.
He was very meticulous with the first few, but then eventually he would just put them in barrels in the Hudson River or put them in a dumpster, throw them somewhere on the side of the road. He just got a little reckless towards the end, and I think that's why he got caught.
Years later, Rifkin would explain another element of his routine to old friend Robert Mladinich.
He said that he purposely picked out the women that looked the most emaciated and the most helpless and the most drug-addled. And the reason for that was he wanted minimal resistance.
The victim found in his car the day he was arrested certainly fit this profile. Rifkin didn't know her name, so detectives took steps to find out who the woman was.
I remember somebody at the crime scene taking a picture of the body. She had a tattoo on her arm, and I remember giving that to the press, and the next day, the family reached out and said, yeah, that's our girl, it's Tiffany Bresciani.
She was a young woman with a loving family back in the South.
She had a very promising life. When she left New Orleans for New York, she wanted to be a performer. Unfortunately, she got involved with drugs, wound up on the streets where Joel picked her up.
With one victim identified, investigators needed to find out if the rest of Rifkin's claims were true.
He just asked for a map of New Jersey, Long Island, Connecticut, and New York City. He pinpointed a number of people on those maps where he deposited bodies after he killed them. We had to corroborate his account of the many bodies that he dumped. And we started to do it that day.
Within a couple of days, 2 bodies had been found exactly where Rifkin said they would be. One was confirmed as 28-year-old mother of 2, Leah Evans. 2 months later, the second would be named as 28-year-old Lauren Marquez. Rifkin also directed investigators to another body.
Irish Sanchez, 25 years old. She was killed on Mother's Day weekend in 1992, and her body was placed near JFK Airport under a mattress.
Iris had an 8-year-old daughter. Her family had been searching for her for over a year. Rifkin also claimed the murder of Anna Lopez, whose body had been found in Putnam County a year earlier. Not all of the victims, some of whom were sex workers, had been reported missing.
Something that makes sex workers more vulnerable is that it's a life that is not closely tracked or monitored. If there's addiction in their lives, that makes it even more chaotic. They might not have stable people in their lives who they see every day. So when they go missing, sometimes it's not noticed for quite a long time.
I know that a lot of the victims' families felt that the authorities just weren't that interested. Either their daughter was missing and no one seemed to care, or else they'd find a body and just say it was a prostitute, she was a drug addict, and just not take it so seriously.
With a handful of victims verified, there was a long way to go for detectives to determine if all of Rifkin's claims were true.
We had obtained a search warrant for his house, and the forensic team and investigators went there, and I met them at the house. And it was very orderly until we got to his bedroom. It was in total disarray. He had a dead snake in a glass tank.
It was a gruesome discovery, but by no means the most disturbing thing crime scene officers would find in Rifkin's home that day. By the end of the search, they'd collected dozens of chilling mementos of his shocking crimes. In July 1993, the home where 34-year-old Joel Rifkin lived with his mother on Long Island, New York, was searched inch by inch.
Joel had such a vast collection of souvenirs of his victims, trinkets, prescriptions, credit cards, even a woman's HIV medication.
There was the lady's identification, driver's license, and various pieces of jewelry.
Serial killers are not ashamed of what they've done. They actually want to keep doing it, and they want to keep reliving that moment. So looking at those mementos, if you like, is almost like looking at porn.
Women's clothing, underwear, and makeup were found, as well as a chainsaw, ropes, and a wheelbarrow stained with blood. The trophies found in Rifkin's home were invaluable in identifying more of his victims.
The investigators found a gold earring that Joel Rifkin had taken from Ana Lopez, and that was another way they identified for sure that he had been the one to kill her.
The earring matched the one Lieutenant Hawker had found on Anna's body in May 1992. The crime scene technicians also found a driving license belonging to a woman called Mary Ellen DeLuca, the victim whose body had been found in Cornwall, New York in October 1991. The cache of evidence in Rifkin's home also pointed to an 18th victim, one he'd not admitted to killing.
Mary Catherine Williams was a former cheerleader from North Carolina. She had been married. Her and her husband were attempting a reconciliation when she was murdered by Rifkin, and lots of her property was discovered in Joel's room. Jewelry, credit cards, things like that.
Other victims linked to Rifkin that month included Mary Ann Holloman, age 39, and 28-year-old Lorraine Orvieto, whose bodies had been found the previous summer. Another was 31-year-old Yun Lee, whose body had been found in 1991 in a steamer trunk in the East River. Rifkin had also confessed to a death that had not even been deemed a murder until that point.
In July of 1991, Rifkin picks up a 31-year-old sex worker called Barbara Jacobs, and again takes her home to Long Island, has sex with her and kills her with exactly the same table leg that he'd killed the previous sex worker.
Her body was put into a plastic bag and thrown into a cardboard box and deposited in the Hudson River in New York.
When Barbara's body is eventually found, her death is attributed to a drug overdose because she clearly was a drug user.
In September 1993, yet another victim was identified.
Violet O'Neill's body parts were found over the course of 3 days in the summer of 1992 in various parts of Manhattan.
By October, Joel Rifkin had been charged with 6 more murders. The following February, he was charged with the murder of Jenny Soto, whose family had anxiously waited for news since she was found dead 16 months earlier.
One day they got a phone call from the investigators, and they said that Joel Rifkin had mentioned the name Soto. They had found an earring of Jenny's in his bedroom. Jenny Soto's mother had told me that she had just prayed to God that she would find the answer and find out what happened to her daughter. And when she got the call about Joel Rifkin, she said it came right between her birthday and Jenny's birthday, and she decided that God had at least answered that prayer for her, so that she at least knew what happened to her daughter.
Despite confirming many of Rifkin's alleged crimes, by the spring of 1994, investigators still had at least 3 sets of remains that had not been identified. In April, Rifkin stood trial for Tiffany Bresciani's murder.
The trial played out in Nassau County, and pretty much it was a cut and dry case. You have the subject, you have the victim, you have the admissions, and you have the medicological examination of the body.
During the prosecution case, he was called a sadistic serial killer who took pleasure in watching people suffer.
Rifkin pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, with his defense team claiming he was a paranoid schizophrenic who could not separate fantasy from reality. The prosecution pointed to the killer's premeditation as evidence of his sound mind.
Because he was premeditated about how he went about these murders, and he did keep trophies.
He was elusive in his methodology of meeting up with these women and then killing them and dropping them all over a wide geographic area.
The jury rejected Rifkin's claim that he was not responsible for his own actions.
On the 9th of May 1994, Rifkin is found guilty of Tiffany's murder and is sentenced to 25 years.
With his client facing future trials for 8 more murders, Rifkin's lawyer told the media the killer suffered from adopted child syndrome, that he believed his biological mother had been a sex worker who, like everyone else in his life, had rejected him. In the end, Rifkin opted not to stand trial, pleading guilty to all of the remaining charges against him.
He was convicted of 9 second-degree murder cases, and he was sentenced to 203 years to life and is now serving that in upstate prison. It is a good relief that the families do have closure with this, and that's one of our main goals, is to provide that to them.
Many of the victims' family members had attended Rifkin's various hearings, even those for whose murders he'd not been charged.
I think for a lot of the victims' families, there is some sense now of justice because they know what happened, and he is going to be in jail for the rest of his life. He wasn't convicted on every single murder, but we know he's never coming out.
At one of the sentencing hearings, Rifkin makes, I think, a very interesting statement. He says, "You all think I'm nothing but a monster, and you're right."
When he began visiting Rifkin several years later, Robert Mladinich was struck by the killer's attitude to the devastation he'd caused.
When I went to see Joel the first time in Attica State Prison, we got reacquainted. I was wondering how I was going to lead into the murders because I figured he didn't want me to see him in that light, but effortlessly, within 15 or 20 minutes, we were talking about murder number 1, murder number 2, murder number 3. He showed absolutely no remorse whatsoever. Joel said, "I want to, but I can't, and I don't know why, but I wish I could."
In 1999, Rifkin launched an appeal against his many convictions.
He says, when the Nassau County Police first stopped him in the truck after the chase, they didn't properly read him his rights, and they didn't allow him to ask to see a lawyer.
Rifkin argued that his confession to 17 murders had been obtained unlawfully and should not have been used in evidence.
In 2002, the New York Supreme Court finally dismissed all his appeals.
In 2013, there was an unexpected development in the story of Joel Rifkin and his crimes. His first suspected victim, the woman known only as Susie, was finally identified as 25-year-old Heidi Balch.
Parts of her body were found at a New Jersey golf course. I think she had one aunt that they were able to contact and make a positive identification.
There is still one suspected victim of Rifkin, Julie Blackbird, whose remains have never been found, and one Jane Doe who's never been identified. A further victim he claimed to have killed has neither been found nor identified. For the families mourning their loved ones, there are still unanswered questions.
He showed no remorse and really didn't give any kind of a motive. He never really explained. I don't think he understood it himself. It was just this rage, this anger against women who he just felt he had power over.
Joel's killing was definitely a power thing for him. He spent a lifetime being bullied. He spent a lifetime being humiliated and degraded. And finally, he was in charge.
And I think that when he was finally caught, at that point, he actually had something that was special about him. He could say, I was the most prolific serial killer in New York.
Joel Rifkin had the urge to kill for sexual pleasure. Instead of resisting his murderous impulses, he deliberately targeted vulnerable members of society to satiate his violent and selfish needs. In taking the lives of at least 9 women and disposing of their bodies with callous disregard, Joel Rifkin has cemented his place both in the history books and in the roll call of the world's most evil killers.
You hear the subway first. The last train of a humid September night breaks screaming under Shinjuku, floodlights slicing a corridor of steam and glass. Then the other sound, the one the city swallowed, a single footstep that never found purchase, a breath that snagged like a thread, a name spoken once and lost in echo. Tokyo 2001, the headline writes itself, midnight disappearance, graduate researcher vanishes between surveillance cameras, cold case, community shocked. But in the dark shelf where the file slept, there was always one more headline underneath, thinner than newsprint, heavier than metal. The city knows more than it tells. She was called Aya Kisaragi, 23, a lab badge clipped to her tote, equations scrawled along the torn cardboard of a convenience store sleeve. Cold air from the station elevators rolled over her and she shivered though the night was thick. The receipt in her pocket, $23.46, canned coffee, a rice ball, and phone credit for a prepaid flip. A small constellation of ordinary choices. A witness remembered the pale stripe of tape on the bridge of her glasses, the kind of detail that sticks because it is both nothing and everything. A second witness remembered nothing at all, only a vaguely blue umbrella and the sense of being observed. "Strange man?" the reporter said. "No," the witness answered after a long pause. "Strange feeling." And then the escalator swallowed everyone, and any narrative you might trust lost its handrail. The cameras blinked and did their work. Aya at the south gate, Aya at the ticket window, Aya pausing near a map where a water stain bloomed like an archipelago, Aya passing the vending machines with a slight tilt to her head you might mistake for indecision and then later call fear. The cameras also failed, as cameras do. A blackout sweep between angles, 6 seconds duplicated twice, a lens smeared with condensation, a red indicator dead in the exact moment the elevator doors slid apart and counted a new soul. 6 seconds, 6 feet to the blind wedge at the end of the concourse. Nobody in Tokyo believes in coincidence. They merely tolerate it like summer heat. The uniform who caught the call had been on his 17th hour, a bento lid curling in his desk trash like a broken shield. He sent 2 patrolmen to trace a rectangle through hallways that smelled of Tide and tile cleaner. They radioed back with the only update that ever matters first, negative. Then came the detective, Sakuma, hands deep in his trench coat despite the weather, a face so plain newspapers never found him interesting. He threaded himself through the station's skeleton and listened to the lives of the tracks, each rattle of steel, each cough of power. He listened for a story. He did not find one. But he found the sound a story makes when it tries to hide, the timed hum of a maintenance door that shouldn't have cycled, the idle sigh from a service elevator no one claimed to use that night, the blank square where a camera should have been and wasn't. He wrote on a notepad, Gap, Ghost, Gate. He circled Gate until the paper tore. Aya's apartment was orderly in the way of a life under construction, a plant with one brave leaf, a schedule taped to the fridge, sticky notes that argued softly with each other. Remember to sleep, don't forget the enzyme, call mother. Her window overlooked a narrow street with a lone vending machine that hummed like a patient animal. On the desk, a pass stamped with a lab's name you recognize only if your world is small and dazzling. On the bed, a scarf the color of old bruises, and a paperback upside down on a paragraph that asked a question and did not wait for an answer. The question was about identity. It felt like a dare. News vans blinked in the wet street and waited to pounce on grief. Reporters ironed their expressions. Cold case takes shape. Studio voice rehearsed. But inside the room, the quiet had weight. Sakuma measured it and wrote, "Room refuses to explain itself." The city did the city thing. Flyers went up and turned to lace in the rain. Rumors spun like lanterns too hot to hold. A talk show invented suspects. A forum invented ghosts. Strange man? People asked one another in department stores as if the answer might be folded between shirts. A janitor claimed to hear a phone ringing behind a wall. A taxi driver said a girl with tape on her glasses asked to be taken somewhere that did not exist. A classmate insisted Aya had spoken about an experiment whose results would change everything. The classmate could not remember what everything was. And in the lab, a supervisor touched the pass on the desk and told the empty room that the world does not change. The world declines to explain itself. He said it like a prayer, like an alibi. Years boiled off. The file collected an ecosystem of stickies and sullen staples. Evidence bags yellowed. Technology went from flip to flat to face. And the grain of the old footage grew rougher by comparison until the pixels felt like stones in the mouth. The station remained itself, a river of strangers, while the ghost of a girl threaded through it, a commuter made of questions. Some cases rot, this one fermented. Communities have long memories when the vanishing is neat and the terror is clean. Fear likes a shape. Parents told children not to ride the last train. Lovers avoided the south gate. A florist said the white lilies sold better in September. It is easy to make a myth. The city makes one for you if you leave a vacuum. Man moi kila, the subtitles on a late-night broadcast teased. Strange clue. It was a cigarette burn on a maintenance schematic, or a batch number stamped in microscopic relief on a service key, or a maintenance company that existed for 6 months, then dissolved like a sugar cube in boiling water. It was all of those, depending on which neighbor you asked. Lost Girl in the City of Eyes, a magazine wrote, and that stuck, because it hurt to say, and it looked nice in a font. The detective retired. He kept one box from the case in his narrow apartment where the kettle sang too loudly. Sometimes he opened it and rearranged the basic facts like furniture. 23, last train, South Gate, blind wedge. He would place the coffee receipt next to a photo of the elevator panel, as if proximity could coax cause. He would do the thing we all do with closed doors. He would narrate them until they opened inward, and if they didn't, he would accuse the door. When his hands shook, he put them in his pockets and told himself it was the cold. It was never the cold. Decades are a trick. They feel like clouds until you push your hand in and feel the ice. The city replaced tiles. It replaced lights. It replaced cameras. It did not replace the blind wedge. The wedge survived upgrades and budgets and 1,000 safety memos because it had a reason, because a design architect had once said the word necessary, because a contractor had once said the word cheaper, because the city always says the word later. An urban planner gave a lecture and called it a liminal seam. The students loved that. The ghost lived there for free, and now the word you insisted on, solved. Tokyo 2001 cold case solved. What does solved mean when the city itself took the witness stand and blinked? The press conference came with soft microphones and the slow, careful cadence of an apology rehearsed down to the angle of the bow. A younger detective, hair neat, vocabulary newer, clicked a remote and showed a map of the station as it was then and as it is now. He said the phrase, new analytic framework, and the room pretended to understand. He said deep learning reconstruction. And an old reporter who had covered the first night wrote, finally, the computer cares. They fed the rotten footage into a patient machine and asked it to dream. The machine watched the 6 seconds that repeated and found the scene where the duplicate began. It counted shadows like heartbeats. It looked into glass and read the reflections, then deduced where eyes had glanced and why. The answer it gave was not a name, but a geometry, a vector of movement that did not match the public floor plan, a path that existed in the way a missing tooth exists, real because the tongue cannot ignore it. Service corridor, the younger detective said to a room that leaned forward as if the word would shuttle them through time. Unauthorized access, he said next, and the room exhaled, because crime prefers a noun with edges. The corridor had been bricked over in 2003 during a minor refurbishment nobody remembered because the invoice died with a subcontractor who died with a debt no one wanted to inherit. The city said the corridor wasn't significant. The city said many things. But in the machine's dream, a figure peeled off from the crowd and slid into the seam like a thread through a needle. Not Aya, someone behind her. He wore the bland armor of the unremarkable, a maintenance jacket with a logo whose company records had been filed under temporary, a cap whose brim concealed the polite erasure of a face, a gait that missed flamboyance by design. He matched no suspect list, triggered no facial alarms, brushed against no named ghost. He simply existed in a moment the cameras decided not to defend. The rebuild team broke the brick and found the corridor exactly where mathematics had lost patience with doubt. Dust coughed into flashbulbs. They found a service elevator with a control panel that bore new scratches over old ones, a palimpsest of use nobody logged. They found a narrow shelf where a human could stand and not be seen if he had learned the station like a blind man learns his own kitchen. They found a coin tucked into a wire harness to force a relay closed, a trick so primitive it felt like contempt. And buried in the wall, in the gap where the elevator shaft met a maintenance cavity, they found what people mean when they say personal effects, because the language refuses to say proof that a person became a fact. A tote strap, a plastic pen chewed into a small constellation of teeth marks, a phone whose battery dreamed of charge, and a laboratory pass with a crack through the final syllable of the name. The headlines wrote themselves in their sleep. Cold case cracked. Arrest imminent. City answers for the corridor in the wall. The younger detective pressed his lips together the way people do when they need them not to betray a thought. The old detective, invited for ceremony, surprised by utility, stood at the back and pressed his fingers against the shallow ache in his chest as if he had pocketed a difficult stone. An arrest didn't follow, not in the clean-limbed way you want the third act to arrive. Records for the maintenance contractor flickered like a bad neon sign. Addresses led to doors that had been painted over 12 times. Names led to namers who shook their heads and said freelancer, like a spell that dissolves accountability. Somewhere in the middle of the paperwork forest, the story did what it had always done. It ducked off the path, slipped between two trees, and invited you to pretend you had never seen it. The press conference became careful. The word suspect avoided the podium like a cat avoids water. The machine's dream was presented as inference, not indictment. The coins in the relay were labeled tampering, not murder. Evidence, evidence, evidence. The city pronounced the syllables like bricks laid in daylight, and yet the corridor still smelled like midnight. But solved, the banner insisted. The family brought in the tote strap and touched it like a rosary. The mother, now gray and terraced with years, pressed 2 fingers to the plastic pass and asked the only question people ask when the city hands them a narrative. Did she know she was being led away? The younger detective answered without words, because some answers are a sound. A breath, snagging like a thread. The old detective, holding the elevator's coin like a museum piece, thought of his torn notepad. Gap, ghost, gate. He drew a circle in the air where no paper would tear. Outside, Shinjuku practiced indifference. Trains kept the exact minutes they loved. Vending machines glowed like altars for the sleepless. Tourists posed in alleys no movie ever loved. Lives continued. But the corridor in the wall had become a character now. It had an arc. It had a motive assigned by architects and budgets and the opportunism of men who move in step with service schedules. The community gathered by the press tape and practiced looking into spaces that had once refused their sight. They asked if Aya's footsteps had sounded different in that narrow place. They asked if the maintenance man, the unremarkable ghost, had breathed differently when he pressed the coin. They asked if a city could apologize to a person. The machine learned a new trick, the papers said. It could read the way shoulders address each other in crowds. It could rank coincidence by rudeness. The younger detective fed the dream 1,000 commutes and asked it to paint absence. In the picture it returned, something flickered in the corner. A reflection inside a reflection. A hat brim caught in the curvature of a plexiglass panel, the most reluctant confession ever pulled out of a city's own geometry. It wasn't enough for a courtroom, it was too much for sleep. Solved. The word stamped itself across the file in red that bled when wet. The family nodded because nodding is the social contract of grief. The station manager bowed so long his vertebrae learned humility. The old detective walked the reopened corridor and pressed his palm to the new tile, warm from the friction of the day. He did not ask what other seams the city wore under its coat. He already knew. Somewhere a door was arguing its right to exist. Somewhere a camera negotiated with fog. Somewhere a girl, never this girl, always exactly like her, counted her change, checked her phone, and stepped into the blind wedge everyone swore had been designed out of the future. You listen again. The subway brake, the footstep that cannot find the ground, the breath snagging like a thread. Tokyo 2001 is not a year but a frequency, a tone you hear only when metal meets intention. Cold case, the anchor intones. Solved, the Chiron promises. In the silence between those two declarations, the corridor whispers its headline in a voice soft as tile dust. What happened can be explained, and what was taken cannot be returned. The city accepts the first part. The living have to carry the second. And in the corner of a screen you can barely see, on the edge of footage rescued from its own decay, a figure passes where a figure should not, pauses for the necessary second, then chooses a door that is there only for those who already know it. The camera forgets to disagree. The train arrives on time. The knight practices being a witness and, like all witnesses, decides it is too tired to testify. The second sound is paperwork. Boxes sliding open. Plastic zipper teeth scratching like matches. A room with no windows and too much light. The younger detective stands at the center like a conductor who's not sure if the orchestra will play. On the table, the cracked pass, the bitten pen, the strap that remembers a shoulder, he says chain of custody in a voice that knows everyone is listening for a mistake. He says this is not closure, this is a door. He doesn't have to say which way it opens. Sakuma sits in the back, coat hung on the back of a chair because it deserves a spine. He watches the room like he watched the station, for the spaces between faces. The new team talks about timelines as if time will apologize. They map the last hour of Aya's known life with a tape measure and a protractor, then with photos, then with imagination. 23:12, lab lights dim. 23:19, friends text, you okay? No reply. 23:34, receipt. 23:46, camera witness. 23:52, gap. The machine gives the gap a shape and a speed. Humans give it a face because humans need faces to blame sleep on. Down the corridor, the forensic techs work the elevator like a priest works a relic. Gloves, brushes, swabs that look like tiny flags claiming a kingdom of dust. The coin in the relay sits in a clear dish labeled Mechanism Anomaly. It gleams with the good manners of an object that has waited patiently to be understood. Someone suggests testing for prints. Someone laughs without sound because the laughter is for the idea that anything in this aerated tomb still belongs to skin. News crews practice sympathy. They love the phrase reopen tunnel. It lets them be archaeologists and advocates in the same breath. A producer whispers to a reporter, "Can we stand here and ask if the city has more secrets?" The reporter nods. The camera leans in like a friend who will never tell you when you look tired. People gather and pretend their presence is evidence. A woman from a florist shop brings lilies because patterns stay loyal when people do not. A student with a zine asks for a quote. The city supplies hundreds, but none in the right tense. In a lab across town, gray paint and humming instruments trying to sing, a specialist reads the plastic pass like tea leaves. Micro scratches slant in one direction, then another. A crack through the last syllable. The crack is not random. It matches a stress pattern from being snagged and pulled twice. The strap confirms. There's a plastic deformation where it courted a sudden load, not a tug in anger, a steady pull, a patient insistence, the kind of force a door applies to a person when a hand holds the pass and the door has decided to be the stronger of the two. They model the pull. They model the moment. Computer bones and muscles flex under simulated fear. The machine paints a motion study in grayscale. Aya pauses, head tilt. The invisible man behind her adjusts to her rhythm and then sabotages it. The service elevator greets them with the smug obedience of the compromised. The door closes at 23:52:07. The corridor erases a sound. Sakuma visits the lab like a pilgrim. He does not touch the plastic pass. He's learned what not touching can prove. He asks for the door's soul. The specialist, who does not believe in souls, says this panel required an external bypass to open in service mode without a key. He points to a faded rectangle on the metal, adhesive shadow, where a sticker once lived and died. Instructions? It was common then for temporary contractors to fix their memory to the machine. A cheat sheet left in plain sight that trained the city to be complicit. The specialist shrugs with academic precision. The world declines to explain itself, he says, stealing a line from a report he once read and didn't forget. Night again. Cities think better in the dark because the chaff goes home and the signal stays out. The younger detective walks the reopened corridor with a camera that isn't part of the security system. He films the way the light slides down tile, the way air shifts when the service elevator sighs and thinks no one hears. He plays it back and hears himself breathing. He hates the sound. He learns to hold it. On the 12th take, he looks like a ghost has borrowed his suit. A man appears who wasn't invited but is always expected, the conspiracy theorist with earnest eyes. He shows a binder full of photocopied invoices. He points to a stamp that walks like a counterfeit. He says a company that lasted 6 months is a vanishing trick, not a business. He wants a villain who is a system. The younger detective wants a villain who has fingerprints and a postal code. Sakuma wants neither. He wants the 6 seconds back. He knows the city cannot refund them. They talk to maintenance crews who were boys then and are fathers now. They bring coffee like peace offerings. The men remember a supervisor who was not a supervisor, a man whose badge never swiped and whose smile never showed teeth. He knew everybody's schedule. He knew when the cameras slept. He knew where to stand, so the city considered him furniture. They do not remember his name. They remember a pen with a rubber bite guard. They remember he smelled like menthol. They remember he whistled only one bar of a song and never finished it. The machine cannot model a whistle. The file notes it anyway. Whistle, one bar, menthol, furniture. A retired scheduler lives alone above a bathhouse and keeps calendars from years nobody wants to reread. The younger detective finds him by asking a question with no subject. Who chose who did what when? The scheduler pours tea like apology and retrieves a ledger that smells like the old city. Paper, graphite, steam. There it is, a block of penciled letters the rain once tried to erase. SVC Core, Night Sweep. Contractor initials that do not match a company that existed. Next to it, a stub of a phone number, 4 digits that look like they tried not to be found. The younger detective copies them down and tastes the iron in his mouth. He thanks the scheduler. He puts the ledger back like a cradle. Phone numbers have afterlives. The 4 digits coast through databases like minnows through nets. They cling to a pager service from a time when people still wanted to be reachable, then to a forwarding exchange that thought it was invisible because it never had to do anything dramatic. Finally, they settle near an address in Saitama that used to be a workshop and is now a nail salon painted a brave pink. The salon owner shrugs and says the landlord is a ghost who drafts contracts by fax. She slides over a number. It belongs to a cousin who belongs to a rumor that belongs to a man who once wore a cap with a brim low enough to make eye contact optional. The cousin runs a storage unit auction on the side. He's proud of his entrepreneurship. He doesn't like cops, except the kind who smile and do not move any of his boxes. The younger detective smiles. He moves no boxes. The cousin mentions a unit cleared in 2003, rent default. The contents? Tools. Cheap, heavy, bad labels. A jacket with a stitched logo that didn't outlive a winter. A stack of station schematics with cigarette burns like constellations. He says he sold it to a scrap man who didn't have the right papers because the papers are a tax on people who try. He laughs like that's a joke that licenses another. He doesn't tell it. Scrap men remember metal. They don't remember faces because faces are debt. The scrap yard breathes rust and optimism. A ledger survives in sun-faded plastic on a pegboard. April 2003, 1 pallet of mixed service gear sold for weight, no buyer name, no receipt, but a note in the margin, tiny, a private smile, cap guy pays cash. The younger detective holds the page like he's asking it to be a person. The wind tries to turn it for him. He lets it. Sakuma visits Aya's mother because the younger detective doesn't know how to sit in silence for the long minutes silence requires. The apartment has become a museum with only one exhibit. The mother offers tea. She never remembers the sugar. She tells Sakuma the plant with one leaf finally gave up, as if that were the city's fault too. On the wall, a calendar always open to September, not 2001. Every September, a perpetual memorial that time cannot argue down. She asks if solved means the girl has a place to rest. Sakuma considers lying. He chooses a thinner truth. Solved means the city can name one of its mistakes. She says the girl deserves more than a confession by architecture. He nods because he has run out of other verbs. An old forum thread, archived accidentally by a site that forgot to die, blinks awake in a graduate student's thesis crawl. The topic, Urban Legends of Shinjuku. A user called Relay King claims the service elevator is haunted by a man who can only move if a coin is in his mouth. It reads like a joke until it reads like a memory misfiled as folklore. Relay King's other posts talk shop in ways only workers talk when they think no one is listening. He mentions welding schedules and grease brands. He mentions a supervisor who isn't. He uses 4 digits in a joke about beating a pager. The machine smiles internally, pattern match. The younger detective calls it hope. The IP traces to a cafe that was torn down and replaced by a building with an attitude. But logs are fossils, and the service provider keeps bones in a box for people who ask the right way. The right way requires a judge and a patient explanation of why ghosts deserve subpoenas. The judge signs because he remembers the headline and because justice occasionally wants to surprise itself. The logs produce a second fossil, a connection from a net cafe in Kawaguchi, midnight, a receipt for 30 minutes of anonymity, purchased with the wet coins of rainy pockets. The net cafe died years ago, but the landlord hoards old routers because he distrusts recycling. In the dust behind a cabinet, on a shelf where spiders filed their own municipal plan, a box of scribbled login slips survives. Relay King's neat handwriting slants left. It's the same slant as the pencil in the scheduler's ledger, not proof, a rhyme. A private security guard from 2001, retired early with a knee that complains in damp, surfaces when a nephew posts a thread. He remembers a man with a cap who wore the color of authority without its weight. The guard tried to chat him up once. The man whistled one bar of a song and stopped. The guard hummed the next bar because songs love to be completed. The man blinked and left. The guard cannot name the tune. He can hum it off-key into a recorder the younger detective holds exactly like evidence and exactly like respect. Later, a musicologist calls it a jingle from a cigarette ad that ran heavily in late 90s commuter slots. Menthol. Furniture. The city rhymes again. They knock on the cousin's door a second time. He is less friendly because second times imply persistence, and persistence implies an outcome. The younger detective says he can prove a fraud from 2003 that has nothing to do with murder and everything to do with taxes. The cousin says taxes are murder. He says he will risk prison before he risks being the man who points. Sakuma says softly that some men are already pointing, only downward, into a corridor in the wall where air has learned to forget names. The cousin looks at him as if he recognizes the shape of guilt, even if he cannot afford its price. He offers a name that isn't a name, Mr. White, a joke about jackets laundered too often, a name for a man who erases himself. A property record shows Mr. White rented a room month to month in a building where nothing costs the same 2 months in a row. A dead mailbox, number 302, peeled label, a ghost of kanji. The landlady has a memory that works like a label maker. Clear, adhesive, slightly crooked. She remembers the cap, She remembers a neat bed and a drawer full of service manuals. She remembers a coin jar labeled laundry, heavy enough to be a weapon. She remembers the day he left. He did not take the manuals. He did not take the coin jar. He took the cap. He took the jacket. He left the whistle on the windowsill like a punctuation mark. The landlady sold the manuals to a recycler and poured the coins into a pachinko machine until the lights told her she had chosen wrong. The whistle is still here. She thinks it's silver. It's not. It's steel, worn by teeth, unremarkable in every way that matters until it doesn't. Forensics touch the steel. It yields no DNA, or yields all of it, depending on your appetite for hope. But under magnification, they find a nick. The nick matches the teeth pattern on the chewed pen like two stubborn facts shaking hands. It's not a signature, it's a stutter between objects that recognize a mouth. The younger detective allows himself a breath he doesn't hate. The press conference the city craves does not happen. The one it needs does. A quiet room, a table, no banners. The younger detective speaks without the heroic cadence he practiced. He says we have established the method by which Aya was taken from a public space into a private one disguised as infrastructure. He says we have established the presence of a contractor without a company. He says we have the outline of a man who treated the station like a script he could edit. He does not say we have a name. He does not say we have a cell ready. Reporters respect the quiet until someone asks the question that lets them leave with a usable line. Solved? The younger detective says solved is a verb, not a verdict. Sakuma silently thinks. Solved is a way to hurt and heal with the same word. Night again, because this story rents by the hour. Rain scrawls on the city like messy subtitles. A bicycle courier slices the street's bright artery. In an alley, a cat reviews its jurisdiction. On a rooftop, a man who might be Mr. White, or might be a story smoked thin after years, watches the lights blink on the station's spine. He cannot see the corridor. He likes that. He hums one bar of a jingle and stops before the part that admits it is trying to sell you something. He drops a coin on the rooftop ledge and listens to the small sound a past makes when it asks not to be looked at. Sakuma cannot sleep. He rearranges the basic facts one more time. 23. Last train. Southgate. Blind wedge. He adds new furniture, coin and relay, whistle, menthol. He adds the machine's dream and draws a little box around it so it won't escape. He wonders if the city intends to build a plaque. He hopes not. He hopes the corridor remains ugly and unmarked so people will ask questions without the comfort of answers carved in metal. He turns off the kettle before it sings. He sits in the quiet because some nights the quiet is the only truth that doesn't try to sell you closure. The younger detective stands in the station at 23:52:07 and lets the crowd carry him forward, then to the side, then forward again. He finds the exact place where the geometry said the path forks into a public life and a private disappearance. He stands in the seam and counts to 6. He steps out alive because he knows the seam now. Knowledge isn't immunity, it's just company. He whispers to the tile, a promise that sounds like a threat to the next blind wedge the city hides. We are coming. The tile is polite and says nothing. And the cameras blink, and the train arrives, and somewhere a mother sleeps with the light on, because solved means the dark has learned your daughter's name and can say it without malice. The city accepts the first part, the living carry the rest. The night watches, patient, like a witness who has finally practiced the truth enough times to say it without shaking. Morning pretends to be merciful, but the fluorescent truth of the precinct says otherwise. The younger detective screens the reconstructed footage again, not for spectacle, not for revelation, but for the small courtesies of error, the way a shadow drifts when a person lies, the way a wrist telegraphs intent before the brain thinks it has given permission. The machine pauses at 23:52:04 and paints vectors like nerves. The crowd's flow looks like a river until you see the eddy where Aya is caught, one body's wake folding neatly into another's. Not a shove, not a grab, an invitation written in the grammar of movement, accepted by mistake, signed by a routine that assumed the world would keep being reasonable for 6 more minutes. A knock at the glass, forensics, with a stack of reports that smell like the inside of a scanner. Tape lift from the service elevator's sill has nothing that wants to survive in court. But the dust tells a schedule. Fine grit from brake pads, typical. A smear of cutting compound where someone dressed a blade against a belt, atypical for that corridor, the kind of detail a contractor leaves when he brings his day into his night. The chemist's note is dry, unromantic. The younger detective underlines it twice because romance does not move cases forward, but evidence that looks bored often does. Sakuma arrives without announcing himself, the way Weather arrives. He leans in and asks what the machine still refuses to say out loud. The younger detective says pattern of approach is consistent with long practice. He says whoever took her learned the city's heartbeat and taught his steps to match it. He says habit is a weapon. Sakuma says habit is a lullaby. They agree in silence that both statements hurt for the right reasons. They run the jingle through a net that was not built to catch songs. Late-night cigarette ad, menthol, rotation heavy during commuter hours, the musicologist had said. An archivist in a tiny office near Ochanomizu, living among tapes that forgot to be digitized, finds the exact jingle and plays it on a machine that clicks like an old camera shutter. The room fills with a cheerful counterfeit of cool. The younger detective watches Sakuma's face. For a fraction of a second, the old man is not in a precinct. He is in a station where tile sweats and vending machines promise flavor like mercy. The archivist apologizes for the hiss. The hiss is what they came for. The hiss is the texture of the years that swallowed a girl. The cousin calls, angry and helpful in equal measure. He says someone asked him last night if the police had been by, someone with a voice that wore a smile like a badge. He took the call at a ramen shop that pretends to be anonymous. The younger detective pulls the shop's CCTV and watches bowls steam like guilty fog. A man in a cap stands in line, brim low but not absurd, a jacket with no logo, a posture that picks a corner and argues it into safety. The camera loves faces and hates hats. The frame yields nothing except a detail the machine whispers like gossip. The man stands on the balls of his feet, not because he is eager, but because he has taught his weight to be replaceable, a habit learned from catwalks and steel stairs that punish heels with echo. Menthol smoke halos a doorway where he lingers too long. The younger detective writes, cap, brim, wait forward, menthol, waiting with nothing to wait for. They ask the scheduler for more dead calendars. He produces a stack bound by a rubber band that surrenders at the worst possible moment, papers fanning the table like a flock frightened into sky. The younger detective gathers months in his hands and feels their softness, the way paper fiber breaks down when it passes through too many fingers. SVC Core. Night Sweep appears twice more in the era that matters, each time paired with contractor initials that do not exist anywhere else. Each time paired with a maintenance note about a minor outage no passenger would have noticed, a light panel that hummed a little too low, a gate that paused before deciding to obey. Not failures, attentions. The city being distracted by a small itch while a hand did something behind its ear. He photographs the pages, returns them to their season, thanks the scheduler with a bow deeper than paperwork requires. A name surfaces in the kind of report that eats daylight. A payroll audit from a company that existed and then graciously stopped. Dozens of temporary IDs issued the week before Aya vanished. One ID returned late. The signature on the return form sits at an angle as if the signer did not want to teach his hand what his name looked like. The first stroke is decisive. The rest refuse intimacy. A woman in HR, retired to a prefecture where trains aren't personalities but schedules, Answers a call on a landline that refuses to die. She remembers a contractor who never asked for directions. She remembers he smelled like metal in summer. She remembers he wore a cap even indoors, the brim pushed up when he pretended not to be shy. She says the name attached to the ID felt borrowed. She cannot say why. Sometimes the body recognizes forgery before the mind catalogs it. They visit the workshop address from Saitama, now the nail salon, and stand in the only square meter that likely remembers the man they have made into a negative space. The salon owner laughs and says if ghosts came in for manicures, she would upsell them gel, but her landlord's cousin, the one who likes faxes and bad luck, keeps a box of ancient leases in a closet that smells like acetone and resignation. Mr. White appears in block letters on a form that forgot to be official. The emergency contact line is a row of dashes like a mouth refusing to open. The younger detective copies the handwriting. The slant is wrong for Relay King. The stroke weight is different from the payroll form. Men who borrow themselves use many hands. A temp who worked night shifts in 2001 messages the tip line at 3 a.m., which is when truth hunts for company. He remembers a supervisor, not supervisor, who gave him a shortcut through a service run because we're all friends here. The temp followed once, then refused the second time because his throat told him not to. Because my throat told me not to is not admissible, but the younger detective writes it down as if it were a physical law. The temp says the man had a pocket notebook where he tallied nothing in particular, flicking a coin against the spiral when he thought. The coin made a sound like decide. They search for pocket notebooks. They find a swap meet where office supplies go to forget their previous owners. In a crate of spiral backs and expired planners, a small book with a bend across its middle, the bend of a back pocket, pages gone, cover intact. A faint emboss from a pen that pressed too hard. 4 digits, the familiar minnows, and a sketch of a rectangle with a diagonal line through it. The shorthand a maintenance man uses for a door that opens against its grain. A stall owner says a man in a cap traded it for a handful of tokens years ago. She doesn't remember his face. She remembers he never took off his cap to haggle. Respect is a currency. He paid with none. The younger detective takes the book to a lab that reads ghosts impressed on paper. Fluorescent dust dances. Letters glow like teeth. He finds a date that matches a ledger, a time that matches a shift, and a single sentence pressed deep enough to be angry. Time the lights. He hears the archivist's tapes hiss again. He imagines the man in the cap counting the pauses between buzz and hum, teaching his steps to step when a camera would be busy deciding whether to behave. He circles the sentence. Time the lights. Sakuma walks the station with an engineer who has the shoulders of someone who has argued with walls and won sometimes. The engineer points to conduit runs like rivers on a map, explains load balancing the way a poet explains meter. Windows where systems think and forget to watch. Sakuma asks him to point to all the places where a coin in the right crack would become a spell. The engineer blushes, then points to 3, then 5, then 12. He says the city is a miracle built on good faith and fasteners. He says he hates that sentence as soon as he hears it. A memory digs itself out of a reporter's notebook. In 2001, a caller who claimed to be a maintenance worker phoned in a tip at 2 a.m., insisted the Southgate cameras were overclocked and would burn out within a year unless the vendor replaced a board. The paper ran a tiny item. The vendor replaced the board. The reporter forgot the voice. The voice did not forget the reporter. He calls her again now, 24 years late, and hangs up when she answers in a way that proves humans never learn not to say hello to their past. The younger detective requests the old phone company records. The company laughs. He persists. The logs yield a payphone in a corridor now walled off for a convenience store that sells memories of itself in limited editions. They find the metal plate that once hosted the payphone. It has a nick, a small one, a crescent where a coin tried to be bigger than it was and failed. The machine is greedy. It wants more footage, more angles, more lives to learn from. They feed it the week before Aya's disappearance, the week after, the month bracketed by her last day. It does not find her again. It finds a pattern of men in caps who are not the same man, a chorus of caution disguised as banality. It builds an average out of their steps, subtracts it from the night in question, and returns a silhouette that is all exclusions. Not tall, not short, not wide, not narrow. A geometry that fits where service corridors insist workers must fit. A posture that helps keys kiss locks without a chaperone. The younger detective stares at the absence made precise and realizes why the old detective hates the word solved. Solved is generous to silhouettes. A call comes in from a woman who cleans a building near the station. She collects whistles. Not intentionally, they are left behind by guards who do not want to remember the taste of duty. She has a box of them. One looks wrong, steel instead of aluminum, heavy for its size, a ridge along one edge where a tooth once argued. She found it in 2002 under a radiator in a stairwell that maintenance used to love and then stopped. The younger detective holds the whistle and does the procedural dance. It yields nothing more than the other whistle yielded, but the ridge along the edge scratches his glove where the chewed pen scratches would be. Sometimes rhyme is proof with stage fright. They bring Aya's mother to the station not because they need her, but because the city owes her an hour in the space that refused to protect her child. She stands at the south gate and does not cry. She lays a hand on the tile and listens to the hum the way some people listen to shells. She asks where the coin went, the one that made the door behave like a collaborator. The younger detective shows her the dish where it sleeps. She nods at it like a relative at a funeral. She says she used to tell Aya that small things matter because small things are what days are made of. She does not say, small things also make rooms into traps. The younger detective hears it anyway. A rumor says Mr. White played pachinko every Sunday morning, not to win but to hide his hands in noise. They visit a parlor that smells like aluminum and defeat. The manager remembers a man who never looked at the lights when he won. He remembers the brim. He remembers the way the man counted coins with a finger that rolled each disc like a switch. The machine might have learned that gesture from him. The manager cannot offer a name. He offers something stranger, a seat never used since, because the regulars decided it was unlucky. Superstition is a map of harm. The younger detective sits in the seat and pretends the world can be bullied into confession by posture. The chair says nothing. A coin sticks briefly in the payout tray and clinks loose like an echo answering from 2001. They search death records and find a man with the borrowed name from the payroll form, deceased, 2004, cause listed as industrial accident, details as sparse as a shrug. The location is a warehouse 2 prefectures away. The owner of the warehouse died in 2017. The nephew who inherited it sells the empty space by the hour to photographers who need light that flatters skin. In a back room behind a panel that pretends to be structural and is not, they find a locker nobody put on a manifest. Inside, a jacket with a stitched logo from a company that dissolved on contact with daylight and invoices, a cap that outlived taste, a notebook with pages excised but the spiral's memory intact, a plastic card stamped temporary access, expired but aware of its immortality, and a box of coins, tied in a stocking, the way men of a certain age store luck. The cap's sweatband carries salts like an atlas. DNA offers a profile that belongs to no one. The database is love. The access card was cloned from a batch that went missing on a Tuesday a month before Aya vanished. The jacket's logo thread fluoresces under a wavelength the lab calls revealing. The younger detective breathes, then remembers not to. Sakuma touches nothing. He looks at the box of coins and thinks about how many doors learn to speak when fed. A neighbor remembers the man in the cap from 2003, says he whistled half a bar and stopped, says he stood on his toes when the ground was wet, says he wore his jacket even in heat, says he was kind to cats and indifferent to the idea of people watching him. She says he moved away after the accident, which is what people say when they need a narrative that spares them from imagining a body. The accident file yields autopsy photos the younger detective will not look at and a list of injuries consistent with a fall from a ladder or a catwalk or a thought that tripped. The right wrist shows an old hairline fracture rehealed, the sort you earn by catching yourself when a door decides not to be a door. He writes it down in a margin he will later fold into a shape that looks like an answer. Old fracture, right wrist, habit of grabbing frames. Night falls again because this case is photosensitive. In Shinjuku, the reopened corridor coughs up one last gift, a smear on a panel behind where the coin sat. Not blood, not oil, a polymer from a glove popular in the early 2000s among workers who liked durability more than comfort. Embedded in it, a grit that does not belong to trains, a grit that belongs to a specific brand of cut-off wheel used to dress steel on site. The brand went out of business in 2005. Inventory dumped cheap to shops near the river. The shop owner remembers a customer who paid cash and asked for wheels in bulk, who declined the bag, who slid the discs into a jacket like a secret. He wore a cap. He stood on his toes. He smelled like menthol. The world declines to explain itself. Sometimes it relents. Sakuma stands with the younger detective at the edge of the station's spine and listens to the city whisper its usual algebra. People plus motion plus light equals story. He says, without looking over, that the point is not to love the word solved. The point is to make the corridor honest enough that it cannot do this again. The younger detective says policy is a thin roof. He says roofs keep rain off long enough to cross a room. They watch a maintenance crew replace a panel that lies too comfortably. They watch a woman with taped glasses walk past a vending machine that remembers a receipt. She is not Aya. She is exactly Aya. The cameras do not blink. The train arrives on time. Somewhere, a coin decides to be only a coin. Somewhere else, a hand that taught doors to misbehave finally learns what it is like to reach and find nothing to pull. Morning leans in with bureaucratic breath. The city issues memos about corridor integrity, about access audits, about the phrase corrective action as if language can grout a seam. The younger detective sits at his desk and reads the memos the way a locksmith reads a fairy tale. For secret doors, no one meant to write. He underlines verbs. He circles incident review, plural. He draws a line to the machine's silhouette and asks a question he does not say out loud. If habit is a weapon, how many times was it fired and we heard only the echo? The machine is greedy and obedient. It gulps 2 decades of station logs, incident reports, maintenance outages, panics mislabeled as fainting spells, night sweeps disguised as favors. It builds a constellation you can only see when you dim the room and let the hum in the walls become a metronome. The points glow around Shinjuku, then drift to Ikebukuro, then a scatter to Shinagawa, a loose belt where service corridors threaded the bones of the city like stitches rushed in a moving ambulance. The silhouette becomes a habit writ across districts, outages precisely timed to create exhalations in surveillance, exits that weren't exits opening politely when fed metal, a jingle whistled under the breath of a man who did not finish songs. Sakuma reads the constellation and does not say serial. He says practice. He says confidence. He taps an old case file whose cover buckled in a flood and dried into a topography you can navigate by touch. A disappearance from 1999. Not Aya, not the South Gate, a woman who worked late at a print shop and vanished near a service stairwell whose camera sightline had an ethical disagreement with condensation. The file never learned to use the word foul. It learned the word unresolved. The younger detective copies the dates and crosswalks them against contractor ledgers that pretend to be random. The ledgers rhyme. There is a survivor, but the city insisted for years on calling her a witness because survival makes paperwork nervous. She worked a graveyard cleaning shift in 2000, rode the last train into a station that sold the illusion that tiles do not notice you. In her statement then, which lived and died as rumor, she described a man in a maintenance jacket who offered a shortcut and a joke about saving steps when steps are all you own. She followed 2 paces. Her throat said no. She stepped back. He smiled like the weather. Someone else brushed between them. The elevator sighed. Later, at home, she threw away a handful of coins that suddenly tasted like keys. Now, the younger detective finds her running a laundromat that smells like steam and soap and earned forgiveness. He asks if she remembers a tune. She hums half a bar and stops. She laughs at herself for stopping, like she obeyed a stranger's old rule. She points to her right wrist, shows a shallow scar from a night when she caught a doorframe she decided shouldn't own her. The scar is the twin of a hairline fracture in a dead man's file. Proof dislikes romance. The younger detective writes it down anyway because romance sometimes leads evidence by the hand when it gets shy. The city's apology committee meets in a room where emotion goes to behave. They rehearse the language of regret the way actors rehearse disaster, cleanly, gently, with cushions under every sharp edge. A deputy mayor practices bowing at a precise angle. A rail executive practices the choreography of culpability without liability. The younger detective is not invited. Sakuma is and goes because age buys invitations to unpleasant rooms. He listens to phrases like legacy design, evolving standards, commitment to safety. He thinks of a coin teaching a relay new manners. He raises a hand and asks a question that sounds like an insult only if you haven't met the corridor in the wall. Where else does the city breathe in the way that lets a man exhale and vanish? The engineer from before, shoulders built by arguments with rivets, slides a list across. 12 seams, then 5 more he thought better of sharing. The deputy mayor folds the paper as if it were a secret and an oath. He promises audits. Sakuma does not applaud. On a late train, a student reads about the case on a phone that thinks it is a mirror. She records a clip of herself telling the story as if it were hers to narrate. Her followers love the word solved. It tastes like sugar on a night that smells faintly of engines. In the comments, a man named for a color writes a sentence with too even a rhythm. This is why you shouldn't trust shortcuts. The student heart reacts. The younger detective, who should be sleeping, scrolls through the comments and hears a whistle between the consonants. He is becoming superstitious. He allows it because superstition is a map toward places science would prefer to pave. The cousin calls again, and this time he is not angry. He is exhausted by the weight of a name that is not a name. He says someone left a box at his door with no return label and too much intention. Inside, a stack of station schematics with cigarette burns like the ones before, a pocket ledger with 3 pages intact, a keycard pouch stained with oil, and a single typed strip. I'm tired of carrying this. The ledger pages list dates and initials in a shorthand the younger detective recognizes. SVC COR, a whistle icon, drawn quick, a private joke, a tiny square with a diagonal, the same line as the swap meet notebook's ghost. The pages end with a sentence stamped hard enough to bruise cardboard. Last time, don't wait. The date below is 2001-09-17, Aya's night. They lift prints no court would love. They lift smudges, no database plans to adopt. They lift resolve from paper like you lift a memory from a song. The cousin says he didn't see who left the box. He says he was in the bath, and when he came out, steam had erased the peephole. He stands in the doorway and looks smaller than a door deserves. At the precinct, a prosecutor reads the accumulation and calibrates her face for disappointment in advance. She says the dead man with the borrowed name won't sit in a dock. She says autopsy and accident and chain of cold. She says the word insufficient with care around the syllables because she knows how sharp it sounds even when it isn't pointed. The younger detective nods like punishment he was owed anyway. Sakuma watches the younger man learn an old lesson. Sometimes you build the truth so well the law cannot find a place to put it down. They go back to the station not for answers, but for an inventory of what doesn't deserve to be called mystery anymore. The reopened corridor breathes like a throat that's learned to be honest. The service elevator's panel now carries a plate you cannot unscrew without swearing at it. The blind wedge isn't blind. The cameras blink in sync with a choreographer's cruelty. A placard offers a safety number and a slogan about vigilance that pretends to be wisdom. A teenager takes a selfie in front of the placard and posts it with a caption that trends. The city has eyes again. Likes arrive in neat lines. The corridor does not look impressed. A janitor from 2001 shows up uninvited and unrepentant. He brings a thermos and a story that always sounded like bragging until the night began to agree. He saw a man in a cap slip through a panel. No one should have known how to open and swore he'd report it as soon as his shift ended. His shift never ended right. The city has a way of promising tomorrow with its mouth full. He never reported. He tells the younger detective because telling is a way to forgive himself by proxy. The younger detective does not offer absolution. He offers a pen and asks the janitor to draw the panel. The hand remembers more honestly than a tongue. The drawing matches the ledger sketch. The janitor looks at the proof of his own reliability and cries like a man who thought memory was a thief and learned it was a witness. They return to the accident in 2004 because the present insists the past owes it interest. The warehouse's back room smells like dust that has learned etiquette. On a beam near the ladder where the dead man fell, a faint line scored into wood, a diagonal across a rectangle, a habit drawing a self-portrait without meaning to. The nephew who rents the space to photographers shrugs. He doesn't believe in ghosts, only late fees. The younger detective photographs the line under raking light. He doesn't amplify it in his mind. He lets it be exactly what it is. Proof that a hand carried a private language to work, then dropped it. In a ward office, a clerk with kind eyes and unkind forms finds a permit application for electrical work at a parlor near the station dated weeks before Aya vanished. The applicant name is a pseudonym that wishes it were duller. The signature is the cousin of the payroll scrawl. The address listed as contact is a mailbox everyone has already visited. The clerk apologizes to the universe in the way only clerks can. The younger detective thanks her like she just handed him a living person. Sakuma visits Aya's mother again because the city is about to give a press conference and he refuses to let a podium be the only voice she hears. The apartment is unchanged in the way a museum protects a room from weather. The plant is gone. The window is cleaner than it needs to be. The mother has learned to speak the language of what if without letting it eat her vowels. She asks if the man who took her daughter is dead. Sakuma says the body attached to a borrowed name died falling off a ladder. She asks if that means an ending. He says it means one man will not stand in a courtroom. She says she didn't want a man. She wanted the door that did this to never exist. She wanted the city to know it kept a secret too long. She wanted to sleep. He says the door is gone. She says the seam remains in people, in policy, in the habit of accepting small risks because their invoices are cheaper. He says nothing because agreement would sound like permission to despair. The press conference arrives on time with its practiced sorrow and crisp printouts. The deputy mayor bows. The rail executive bows deeper. The engineer speaks concrete and cable like a confession. The younger detective outlines the method, not the man. He refuses the silhouette, the dignity of a legend. He says a person exploited institutional blind spots with a routine developed over years. He says the corridor is sealed, the seams audited, the cameras honest. He does not say that habits migrate. He does not say that geometry loves to be learned. A reporter asks if copycats worry them. He says vigilance is policy, not prophecy. It reads as a line meant to sound strong. It is a line that hopes. Afterwards, the younger detective steps into air that tastes like wet electricity. The city has turned the news into something you can buy with snacks. People photograph the corridor the way tourists photograph places where history became measurable. He hears the jingle from the archivist's tape bleeding out of a convenience store radio, a retro ad block for a brand that died and refuses to admit it. He watches 3 people hum half a bar and stop. He wonders how many habits walk a city long after the person who invented them has fallen off a ladder, or out of favor, or into anonymity. He tries to hum the rest of the jingle and stops too. He laughs at himself and hears a coin hit tile in his memory. Night again, because the case refuses to live in daylight. A maintenance team seals a seam 2 districts away because a memo grew teeth. The engineer draws a square and a diagonal and crosses both out. He teaches a panel to require 2 keys and a human who answers his name out loud. A rookie guard whistles the wrong jingle and gets corrected by an old guard who has learned which half melodies are cursed. A cat sleeps on a railing and forgives no one. The city rehearses being safer the way a body rehearses walking again after a break, carefully, impatiently, with new pain that counts as progress. The younger detective sits with Sakuma on a bench that used to be a smoking area and now is a place to apologize to your lungs. They watch the station breathe honestly. The old man says, not kindly and not cruelly, solved does not mean satisfied. The young man says, solved means someone taught the city to pronounce what it has been doing with its mouth shut. A train rushes past and writes a new headline on the glass with its reflection. Cold case, method found, aftermath ongoing. They read it without moving their lips. A message lands in the tip line at 0211. No words. A recording, night noise, the soft applause of tires, the vending machine's oasis hum, and a whistle. Half a bar, stop by choice. Then a coin clinks onto stone and another, until the sound becomes absurd and ritualistic and funny in the way fear is funny when it doesn't own you anymore. The forwarding data traces to a park near the river where the city forgets to be urgent. The younger detective goes because hope is stubborn and insomnia is loyal. He finds nothing except a neat stack of coins on a bench, 9 high, a small monument with no plaque and perfect balance. He tips the stack with a finger and listens to the sound a past makes when it asks to be reorganized into something like peace. Morning again, the kind that insists you answer emails. The machine wants more, always more, but the city has given enough to call this chapter finished in the only tense that matters to committees. The younger detective closes the file not because it is done, but because it has learned to end a page without inventing a new paragraph. He writes a line for himself where only he will ever read it. We will never know if he turned back once, if he hesitated, if a hand trembled before it taught a door to greet a girl as a guest instead of a theft. He adds a second line because Sakuma would scold him for sentimentality if he could see inside this note. The important thing is not to let another man inherit the habit without a fight. At the south gate, a woman with taped glasses checks a map, head tilted, the same tilt that in another year would have broken a city's heart. A station attendant appears, not wearing authority like a costume, but like a chore he respects, and asks if she needs help. She smiles and says she's fine. The cameras blink. The light holds. The elevator waits like a machine that learned its place. The corridor whispers finally the only line it should have ever been able to say, not this way, and we move with all our fragility and our schedules and our faith in systems that are learning to deserve it, into a day that has agreed, reluctantly, conditionally, to be honest. The day pretends to heal quickly, but everyone who works under the city knows there's a second hand on the clock that counts different wounds. The younger detective rides the circle line with a notebook and no plan, letting stations wash over him like old photos you aren't ready to throw away. Every platform looks like a confession learning grammar. Every maintenance door looks like a lip pressed thin. He writes down the seams the engineer listed and adds 3 more that only exist because people believe in shortcuts. He is not hunting a man anymore. He is hunting the places where a habit can set up shop and pretend to be infrastructure. At noon, in a conference room that smells like dry markers and apology, a task force forms around a phrase with terrible posture, vulnerability registry. The engineer presides with maps that look like the nervous system of an animal that learned to love stress. A transit lawyer folds and refolds a handkerchief until it looks like a problem that cannot be solved. A sociologist reminds them that fear travels faster than trains. The younger detective says quietly that fear also leaves footprints. Sakuma sits at the back and lets the young make their first mistakes without interference, the way a teacher watches a student learn to walk in water. The room lands on an order of battle. Audit every service corridor, log every bypass panel, retire every legacy relay that listens to coins like prayers. They underline every verb. No one underlines consequence. No one needs to. An email cracks the afternoon open. Subject line, if he's dead, why am I hearing him? The sender attached a clip that sounds like a breath hidden inside static and a whistle only a city could hum. Half a bar that stutters into silence, recorded in a stairwell near a mall that used to host a net cafe with broken headphones and sugar water. The younger detective plays the clip 3 times, then walks to the stairwell with a microphone that thinks it is brave. He stands where concrete sweats and listens to pipes rehearse discomfort. He feeds the audio to the machine anyway because machines, unlike men, do not scoff. It returns a spectrogram with a signature that looks like a rude fingerprint made by steam and echoes. Not a man, a ghost of acoustics. The whistle is an artifact of air moving past a seam and a great perforation pattern that creates music by mistake. He is relieved for 6 seconds. Then he writes down the discovery like a suspect because artifacts can be inherited, and some inheritances are more dangerous than uncles. At 3, the prosecutor invites herself into the precinct with eyes that refuse flattery. She brings a list of questions that do not believe in closure. Have you tied the accident in 2004 to any payment that smells like hush? Have you found any camera angle that sees a second shadow? Have you audited the vendors who maintained the Southgate firmware? Have you asked why the machine stopped duplicating frames at exactly the moment the elevator learned to misbehave? The younger detective answers each with the patience of someone who knows he owes patience. The answers are mostly no or not yet, or the sort of yes that collapses in sunlight. She says the word civil loudly enough that the walls hear it. She says the families of the unresolved will want a verdict the criminal code cannot offer. Sakuma watches the word civil sit down at the table and make itself at home like a relative who will unpack slowly and stay. The ledger pages from the cousin, 3 thin organs of memory, go under a microscope that has seen too many insects and not enough ghosts. The fibers show a pressure pattern at the top right corner where a thumb lived for years, impatient and precise. The fingerprint is a smear, no more than a sigh pressed into cardboard, but the ridges hint at a loop, a small loop, right-handed. The lab writes a paragraph that refuses to pretend it has discovered a person. The younger detective reads the paragraph like a letter from a shipwreck. We recovered few artifacts. Your loved one was here. The ocean is honest only about being itself. He files it where hope goes when it doesn't know what to do next. Evenings have a way of creating their own folklore. In bars that pretend to be anonymous, men in work coats that smell like aluminum tell the story back to each other, trading the noun contractor like a charm you must hold to avoid becoming the kind of man who vanishes or makes vanishing possible. One of them swears he knew a guy who kept a coin in his mouth to remind himself doors should only open by permission. Another says he knew a guy who couldn't finish any song because endings, even little ones, gave him a rash. The younger detective sits 2 stools down, a glass of water sweating like a nervous witness, and lets the talk fill his pockets. He leaves with a napkin that says nothing you can prosecute and everything you can feel under your fingers. When the train rakes the night's enamel, there is a rumor of a copycat. Rumors travel in packs. This one brings a shaky video of a man in a cap standing too long near a service door in Ikebukuro and a still image of him on the balls of his feet like he doesn't trust weight. The younger detective screens the clip and sees a man who has watched the news and learned the choreography of fear. He sends patrol with questions and courtesy. The man works at a bookstore that sells titles that believe they can cure you. He stands on his toes because he has a back injury and cap, because he hates his hairline, and near the door because the air is cooler there. He whistles because anxiety needs somewhere to live. He knows the jingle because everyone who lived through late 90s commuter hours does. He apologizes like he offended the city with his posture. The younger detective nods and apologizes back and leaves with a feeling that makes his hands empty. Some stories, once told, teach strangers how to dress. Sakuma visits a temple where the stairs are as honest as they are rude because he has learned that some rooms offer a quiet that counts as evidence. He lights a stick of something that insists it is smoke and prayer at the same time. He does not ask for justice, he asks for balance, the way an engineer asks a bridge not to develop preferences. A monk who knows the news, without a television, tells him that ghosts are functions, not figures. If you fix a function, the figure cannot return. Sakuma thinks of the corridor, the coin, the relay that learned bad manners, the seam that taught a man how to vanish. He bows to a logic he can live with. Night rolls in with applause, the sound of tires slicing wet. The reopened corridor wears its new armor like a body that has relearned walking. Guards compare rumors the way surgeons compare scars. A student with a mic records ambient audio for a class and catches voices that do not know how to ignore microphones. How do you fix a city? You teach it to admit where it is weak. But won't that make people afraid? People are already afraid. Then what does solved mean? It means fear can be translated into plans. It means we put names on the places where whispers turn into invitations. It means an elevator with a temper now has a chaperone. The student turns in her assignment and gets an A because her professor recognizes useful sentences when he hears them. The younger detective gets a text with a photo that looks like a mistake. A service panel in Shinagawa with a tiny rectangle of adhesive shadow where a sticker once lived and died. The sender is the engineer who blushes when panels betray him. He writes, simply, "Found another ghost." The detective goes, and there it is, a panel that could be taught to forget procedure if you feed it a cheat sheet. He opens the wall with a key that learned his name and finds a relay that looks like it remembers coins as fondly as cousins. The engineer replaces the relay with a module that only answers questions it can verify with 2 separate sources and a password long enough to feel like penance. They stand in the corridor and feel the city's pulse get marginally less chaotic. They treat marginal as victory because marginal is how safety accumulates. A letter arrives on paper that makes its own light. No return address. Inside, a single sheet with a single sentence. "I thought I was helping people get home faster." The younger detective turns the page over like it might decide to be a different piece of paper. The sentence is less a confession than a principle weaponized by convenience. He writes in the margin, "Lies usually dress as manners." He runs the letter through every forensic toy that can still be trained to care. The fibers tell him the paper came from a cheap pad bought in a shop that sells pens next to snacks. The ink is common, the hand disguised, the loop in the R tell that matches nothing and everything. He files it with the coins, the cap, the jacket, the whistle, artifacts of a man who built a life out of failing to be present. He dreams. A corridor that keeps becoming a throat, a city that keeps playing the same jingle and stopping like memory, is a superstition you have to obey. Aya stands at the map with her head tilted, and when he walks toward her, she turns into every woman the machine ever taught him to protect. He wakes with the old detective's sentence in his mouth. Solved is a way to hurt and heal with the same word. He writes it down in a notebook he does not intend anyone else to read. He underlines hurt. He underlines heal. He draws a thin line between them and labels it work. Morning drills at the windows. The prosecutor asks for a briefing formatted the way courts prefer. Nouns aligned, verbs constrained, adjectives on leashes. The younger detective presents what they can stand on. The method is a floor. The man is a rumor with bones. The corridor is guilty. The city enters a plea of negligence with repentance. The prosecutor says a civil suit will thread its way through corridors of its own. She will make sure it doesn't learn to pause at the wrong doors. A rail executive speaks in a voice that has had its edges rounded by consultants and says the company will not contest what it cannot defend. He almost says sorry. He says regret. They nod. They are almost satisfied. They are not. Someone posts a side-by-side of the station then and now, a split screen where pixels bruise into high definition. The blind wedge ingrained next to its present self, lit, watched, renamed. A caption, "We found the seam and stitched it." The comments argue whether stitches are ugly or heroic. A mother writes beneath her anonymous avatar that stitches are proof you were hurt and you did something about it. The post gets saved into 1,000 private folders that people make for hope because hope has to be collected on purpose. In the lab, a cluster of new dots glows on a city map. Small outages, minor pauses, the kind of nonsense maintenance schedules breed. The machine doesn't care about plausible, it cares about rhythm. It circles clusters whose pulse matches 2001's quiet sabotage. The younger detective visits each, says hello to panels that do not remember being dangerous, listens to air that hums nothing but electricity's satisfaction. He finds nothing alive. He finds the ghost of a habit trying to grow like moss where the city refuses it now. He writes a small thank you to the engineer who designed a circuit that declines to be charmed by coins. The forum where Relay King once lived wakes up after years of inactivity. A user with a new name and an old voice posts a single message. Sometimes a place is the criminal. The reply chain is chaos. Jokes, grief, philosophy on discount. But buried in the noise, an old coworker from a forgotten contract writes, he used to tap his wrist when he wanted to leave a room before the conversation was over. He always left on time. The younger detective reads it and imagines a man who turned his body into a schedule, who made doors obey because he considered obedience a polite form of speed. He circles the line and does not mistake it for sympathy. It is simply another line of a blueprint he will use to keep others alive. Sakuma receives an invitation to a small ceremony in a smaller room. The station will place a plaque, modest, dull on purpose, near where a door confessed its personality. He goes because rituals do not have to be effective to be necessary. The plaque does what plaques do: names, dates, a sentence about vigilance that sounded better in rehearsal. Aya's mother touches the metal with a fingertip like she is measuring its temperature. She says thank you to the engineers, not because thanks is sufficient, but because gratitude, like grief, needs exercise to stay honest. Sakuma bows and returns to the bench that used to be a smoking area and watches a guard teach a rookie how to stand in a way that rewards attention instead of theatrics. The younger detective stops carrying the coin dish around like a talisman. He leaves it in evidence where it can be boring. He chooses new habits, checking seams on his way to work, listening for changes in the hum, answering the tip line himself on nights when insomnia thinks it owns him. He writes an internal memo that pretends not to be a sermon. Teach recruits how to read crowds like rivers, not walls. Teach them that courtesy can be weaponized. Teach them that elevators are devout believers in the last command they received. Teach them that a city is a machine with moods, and moods can be mapped. A journalist puts out a piece with no flourish in every fact. She writes about the coin, the relay, the corridor, the audits, the lawsuits, the engineer's list, the monk's function, the mother's September. She refuses to name a man who turned himself into a set of habits. She names every seam. She ends with a sentence that pretends to be a prayer and functions as a plan. May the doors we trust be as honest as the people who walk through them. The piece circulates like rain-learned streets. Schools assign it. Guards carry a folded page in wallets next to photos of people who measure their lives in shifts and schedules. The tip line stays busy without becoming cruel. People report doors that squeak too long, cameras with lazy red eyes, panels that look like they want to remember bad manners. The younger detective triages with a patience that would have embarrassed him a year ago. He thanks more than he asks. He sends crews. He closes loops. He learns to love boredom the way a heart loves rhythm. Some nights he goes to the reopened corridor and stands until he can no longer hear the old hiss of duplicated frames in his head. He waits for the jingle and denies it satisfaction by finishing the bar in a whisper, a private exorcism. A week passes without anything dramatic. The city calls that progress. The younger detective calls it a pause between breaths. He meets Sakuma for noodles. They eat like men who respect the invention of chopsticks and loathe the invention of anniversaries. The old detective says he's thinking of moving to a quieter ward where trains are sermons instead of gossip. The younger says he won't. He says he owes this corridor his insomnia. They laugh like forgiveness. They pay with coins and listen to the sound on the counter and do not flinch. The cashier slides the coins into a drawer that does not know it is an instrument. Outside, a bicycle courier scribbles a path through traffic like a line connecting headlines. Yesterday's fear, today's correction, tomorrow's rumor. And still the city breathes. Somewhere a camera fogs and then remembers not to. Somewhere a panel considers disobedience and is talked back into reason by a circuit that learned shame. Somewhere a woman with taped glasses leans toward a map, tilts her head, and finds a helper, not a thief. The machines dream poorly and uselessly until a human gives them a reason. The humans practice being the right kind of conductor. The night watches without the arrogance of ownership. The corridor keeps its promise. The coin sleeps. The whistle, in a drawer, is just steel. And the word solved, which once tried to be a finish line, becomes a milestone you don't stop to celebrate because the road asks you politely to keep walking. Rain slicks the city into a single reflective surface, a sheet of memory spread taut over steel. The younger detective stands under the south gate canopy and watches umbrellas bloom and close with the discipline of lungs. He tracks nothing and everything. The way a shoulder lowers when a stranger approaches kindly, the way a knee cocks when a man prepares to pivot toward a seam, the way light wobbles when a camera recalibrates and decides to tell the truth. He takes no notes. He has learned that muscle remembers what notebooks forget. He breathes with the station until the hum becomes a key, and once you hear the key, you notice when a tooth is missing. A call pulls him sideways. Civil, the prosecutor reminds, has become plural. A cluster of families who learn to arrange holidays around absence have hired a lawyer with a voice that teaches concrete shame. In a meeting room that smells like cardboard and hard candy, the families lay photos on a table the way offerings are arranged when you can't name the god but you know it wants reverence. faces, hair parted this way or that, did this. Hands in mid-gesture forever. The lawyer presents a diagram of responsibility that pins the city in place like a moth, but she speaks without venom because the point is not to enjoy the pin. It is to admit the wings deserved not to be pinned at all. The younger detective answers questions that are both kind and surgical. Where was a camera? When did a relay learn mischief? Who signed a maintenance order? How many minutes did the station confuse a theft for a routine? He does not say what he knows in his marrow, that the coin and the cap were symptoms, and the illness was the seam dressed as policy. A training session follows, fluorescent, relentless, packed with uniforms that still smell like new cloth. The younger detective stands next to the engineer with shoulders made by arguments with bolts and draws 2 squares and a diagonal on a whiteboard that squeaks like it resents being used for anything true. He says this is a panel that can be taught to forget procedure. This is how you teach it to remember. This is how you stand when you're shepherding humans through a crowd that is trying to behave. He teaches them to count not steps but the slope of attention, to see a courtesy that insists too long as a hook, to hear the wrong kind of pause. He makes them practice standing on the balls of their feet, not because drama lives there, but because readiness is a polite refusal to be surprised. Someone laughs at the posture, then stops, then understands. The engineer passes around a relay old enough to vote. It looks like a museum piece with delusions of influence. He shows them where the coin lived, how it learned to become a command. He says nothing poetic and everything that works. At 0203, the tip line coughs up another voice that prefers to be architecture. A cleaner in a station 2 lines away says a man in a cap asked for the nearest restroom and stood too long near a service door while asking. The younger detective goes because insomnia is a leash that sometimes leads to the right hydrants. He arrives to find a uniform already there, a rookie whose face still believes deadlines are fair. The rookie has done everything right. Moved the man 3 steps from the seam, asked his name without making it ammunition, told the door with his body that it would not be opening for superstition tonight. The cap man turns out to be a father whose toddler has mastered escape. The door air was cool. The cap hides a sunburn that refuses to be photogenic. They all apologize at once, a chorus of decent regrets. The younger detective thanks the rookie for reading a chord and not pretending it was a melody. Afterwards, he stands by the panel and listens to it working like it should, boring, obedient, uninterested in story. Meanwhile, the forum that invented Relay King becomes a study group for civic anxiety. A thread blooms, places that feel like doors even when they aren't. People post photos of stairwells that learn to be generous, of corridors that learn not to swallow, of panels with adhesive shadows that now wear brass plates like armor. A maintenance worker posts a shot of his palm, calloused and nicked, and writes, "This is what closes the door now." The thread gets pinned. It becomes a manual the city didn't know it needed. Sakuma visits the reopened corridor at an hour that used to be annexed by ghosts. He leans against a wall that has learned to believe in itself and watches a janitor polish a handrail with circular patience. The old detective says to the empty air that this is what solved means when it grows up. Someone chooses to clean what you will touch and chooses to do it well, and you never notice because noticing isn't the point. He smiles without witnesses and goes home by a route that used to be a confession and is now a path. A newspaper runs a follow-up that refuses to be tempted by legend. It tells the small truths. The coin changed weight only in our heads. The jingle made the city complicit because memory is a lazy archivist. The service elevators are now chaperoned by redundancies whose job is to be boring. It quotes the monk, "Fix the function, the figure cannot return." It quotes the mother, "Stitches are proof." It quotes the younger detective, but only the part where he admits he does not sleep well and has decided to deserve the insomnia. People read it on trains and nod like they've agreed to an appointment with their own attention. The civil case tilts the city like a table wedged with folded napkins. Discovery pries up covers that prefer to nap. Vendor contracts with maintenance clauses written in euphemisms. Audit summaries that hid their sharp edges in appendices nobody read. Memos that apologize to the future to save money in the present. The rail executive learns to say the phrase "we were wrong" without adding at the time. The judge says words like standard of care and foreseeable and the kind of sentence that makes room stop pretending. A system that eats people because it can is not a system. It is an appetite. The settlement will not fix a year. It will fix procedures, which is dull and holy. In Shinjuku, life insists on being itself. A busker under a dripping awning plays a melody that has no jingle in it, and the city tips with coins that are just coins. A couple argues gently over a map and ends up laughing because the argument was an excuse to stand still. A guard stretches a wrist and rolls his weight from heels to toes because habit is a muscle that deserves to be trained. The younger detective leans near the south gate and feels the station's pulse settle into the tempo of something that has survived a fever and learned to respect water. At noon, Surveillance Audit Team 3 finds an old camera behind a plexiglass shield whose anti-fog coating is tired of pretending. They replace it. The feed gains a clarity that makes the past look like a rumor. A small crowd watches the swap like a ritual. A child asks if the new camera can see thoughts. Her mother says it can see habits, and habits are thoughts that practiced. The child processes that with the seriousness children bring to good sentences. She waves at the camera. It waves back in the only way cameras know how, by working. The prosecutor asks for one last walkthrough of September 2001, not because the case needs it, but because language does. They stage the timeline with markers on the floor that look absurd until they start to align and then look inevitable. 2312, lab dims. 2319, text unanswered. 2334, receipt. 2346, frame. 235207, door. 23. The part the machine drew in geometry and the wall confirmed in dust. They stand in silence while the elevator hums with innocence. The prosecutor writes a line she will use later when the civil court wants a closing that doesn't insult the daylight. Institutions are responsible for the seams in their walls and in their habits. The younger detective nods like a student who has learned to admire a teacher's economy. At 17:30, a commuter faints, and the station handles it like choreography, a circle widening to make room for breath. A stranger fans the woman with a newspaper, a guard clears a path, an attendant appears with water. A camera watches without voyeurism because angles learned boundaries. When the woman wakes, she apologizes to everyone for having a body. The younger detective tells her no one here minds bodies anymore. We only mind doors that think they are secrets. She laughs weakly and thanks a world that decided to understand the correct category of concern. Night brings a new kind of rumor, the good kind. A patrol caught a panel trying to be clever and corrected it with a key and a call. A rookie froze at the sound of a jingle and then remembered to finish the bar out loud so fear didn't get to author the silence. A janitor closed a seam with nothing but tape and attention and logged the work like a soldier logs a trench. None of it trends. All of it matters. In a bar that doesn't need to be anonymous anymore, two maintenance workers toast to redundancies, and the older one says with the gravity of a prayer, "May our work be unseen and unforgiving." The younger detective dreams again, but the dream has conceded new terrain. Aya is at the map, yes, head tilted, yes, but the camera does not blink, the elevator does not bargain, the corridor refuses theater. When he moves toward her, she doesn't evaporate into the plural of all the women who walk the station. She nods and keeps walking into a future that still requires attention, but not apology. He wakes and does not write the dream down. He lets it live where it belongs, in the category of outcomes you train for, until the station can produce them on demand. A small ceremony happens without microphones. Engineers gather in a corridor no one will photograph and sign a panel with a marker where only the wall will know. A guard adds a cartoon coin with a line through it. Someone draws a tiny square with a diagonal and then crosses that out so decisively the plastic squeaks. They laugh the clipped laugh of men and women who have earned the right to laugh near a place that once asked them to whisper. The engineer with argument shoulders says, to nobody in particular, that he'd like to die in a city that has lost patience with clever shortcuts. No one calls it dramatic. No one calls it naive. They nod as if he's set a standard you can set screws by. Sakuma considers retirement the way a carpenter considers finishing a table he has lived with too long to believe it is just wood. He walks one last list of seams with the younger detective and pretends not to be collecting his own ghosts. At a doorway that used to be a rumor, he stops and points to the floor's scuffed crescent, the mark of 1,000 pivoting feet. "Do you know what this is?" he asks. The younger detective says, "Choreography." Sakuma says, "Consent. We all turn here because we choose to, not because someone learned to make the door decide." He claps the younger man's shoulder. It is permission disguised as contact, and still the city breathes without insisting on being watched. A coin drops. It is a payment, not a password. A whistle threads the crowd, half a bar until someone somewhere finishes it on purpose so the past doesn't get to own the cadence. The station's hum settles into a key you no longer have to brace against. The corridor carries only air. The elevator obeys only names. The map receives a new fingertip and gives back a path that is not a trap. Tokyo 2001 is no longer a year marking a wound, but a lesson engraved where only the maintenance logs will honor it. Do not tolerate seams that invite confidence in the wrong people. Do not teach machines to mistake persistence for permission. Do not leave doors with appetites. The night listens, pleased to be demoted to ordinary darkness. The morning sifts its light through glass that does not lie. And somewhere in a drawer that refuses to mythologize steel, a whistle stays exactly what it is, an object with no power after the function it supported was dismantled and the hands that held it lost their habit of harm. The sky clears the way a wound scabs, slow, imperfect, stubbornly honest. The younger detective walks the perimeter of the South Gate where tour groups now pause like they've found the edge of a myth and want proof it no longer bites. He doesn't wave them on. He watches a guide point at the corridor and say, quietly, "This is where we decided to become better at being a city." The group nods the way strangers nod at funerals for people they didn't know but could have, if the subway had breathed differently. He files the sentence in the cabinet where he keeps phrases that try to be useful. Decided to become better. Decision as anti-seam. Across town, an art school installs a show that thinks it is medicine. Projection maps pulse the geometry of the station onto raw concrete, the blind wedge a shaded bruise, the service corridor a vein sutured with light. A looped soundtrack stitches the monk's sentence into the hiss of old tape. Fix the function, the figure cannot return. Visitors stand in front of the screen and take photos of their shadows inside the recreated corridor. Tourists inside a subtraction. The younger detective goes after hours when the projector's fan breathes like a small animal. The curator, a woman who used to fall asleep on late trains and wake at the right stop because she trusted rhythm, walks him through a piece that superimposes live ambient audio over the machine's reconstruction vectors. "You can watch intention," she says. "It moves differently than chance." He thinks of the class where he taught rookies to stand on the balls of their feet and decides this installation is a training manual that learned to paint. Sakuma reads about the exhibit in a paper that still leaves ink on fingers and decides not to go. There is work in not revisiting a wound just because it dances differently under new light. He makes coffee like a ritual and opens the box he kept from the case. He rearranges the truth again for the first time in weeks, then stops halfway through and laughs because he understands now he has been filing ghosts by alphabetical order and wondering why they refuse to behave. He writes a note and tapes it inside the lid. Do not allow nostalgia for questions to poison gratitude for answers. He is not a sentimental man. He reads the note twice. He allows himself the luxury of agreeing with himself. The civil suit becomes air you can smell. Discovery makes everyone philosophical. A vendor's email surfaces that reads like a dare to fate. We can squeeze another quarter out of these units. Failure modes are tolerable. A project manager replies with an emoji that aged poorly. The court takes patience and turns it into consequence. The rail company writes checks, big ones, the kind that try to compensate a geography of years. Aya's mother refuses to look at numbers the first time. She looks at the letter the engineer sends with the settlement, the one that spells out what was replaced, what was sealed, what will flicker red if any panel tries to remember bad manners. She frames the letter. She folds the check into a charity that installs panic buttons in places with too much indifference and too little budget. She tells a friend, whispered, that she wanted to buy silence and found she didn't need to. The city had finally decided to speak. A white-collar podcast invites the younger detective to explain habit as weapon. He declines, then accepts, then declines again, and writes a 2-paragraph statement the host reads with surprising humility. We do not name a man who vaporized himself into procedure. We name the seams we sealed, the relays we retired, the training we normalized. We name the months we refused to forget. We name the doors new laws gave personalities we can audit. The episode trends because the internet has a crush on sentences that commit. A bookstore stocks a slender blue book collecting the city's memos, the monk's line, the journalist's piece with the prayer, the prosecutor's closing, the mother's September. It sells modestly and forever. Night remains greedy, but it is clumsy now. A pattern ping flares on the audit map, a panel in a station you wouldn't expect tries to masquerade as yesterday. The engineer with argument shoulders texts the younger detective one word, anomaly. They meet in a corridor that smells like electricity and apologies and find a relay wedged with a guitar pick. A clever man's upgrade to the coin trick that once felt like folklore. The pick bears a logo from a band that dissolved on a Wednesday in 2002. The older trick's air is lazy. It doesn't understand that redundancies now travel in pairs. The module ignored the wedge and tattled. They pull the pick, check the logs, rewind the cameras, teach the station it did the right thing. The younger detective pockets the pick the way you pocket a lesson. He writes on a small tag in his desk drawer, "Try harder next time." He means the city, not the villain. He closes the drawer. A design firm pitches a campaign the rail company actually approves. Posters that diagram manners as infrastructure. Stand where people can see you. Ask with your mouth and your hands, not with your body. If you don't know a door, don't instruct it. Finish the song. The last line becomes a joke and a promise. Commuters whistle the jingle and complete it loudly, a petty exorcism that contains real power. A busker adopts the melody, speeds it up, lifts it into something that feels like a victory lap and less like a dare. Coins clatter in their case. None of them become commands. A woman who survived almost being led once, laundromat proprietor Scar, laugh that refuses pity, volunteers to teach a night class for station staff on how danger makes politeness do cartwheels. She stands in front of a whiteboard and writes sentences she has earned the right to write. A smile is not a credential. A shortcut is not a favor. A service jacket is not a personality. A hand on your elbow is not leadership. A whistle that ends itself is not a song you owe silence. The recruits take notes because people talk about instincts like they're muscles at the gym. Nobody talks about how often instincts are trained to be agreeable. She trains them back. The younger detective makes himself visit the accident site from 2004 one more time, not because he believes in symmetry, but because closure, properly cooked, can be nourishment. The warehouse has been reborn as a photo studio where wedding parties pose in light that flatters optimism. He stands in the back room with the beam that still holds a scored diagonal and lets couples laugh through a door that used to be a rumor. A photographer asks if he is lost. He says he is visiting someone who taught him something. The photographer nods like he's heard worse explanations from fathers and ghosts. There is a photo on the wall of a couple holding hands in front of Shinjuku Station. The corridor is not in the frame. It exists in the frame's confidence. Sakuma retires without ceremony because some exits should not audition for applause. He sends the younger detective a postcard from a ward where trains apologize for being on time plus 1 minute. The card reads, "Teach your people to love boredom. It is a shield. P.S. I finished the jingle." He doesn't write the notes. He writes the words, "I finished." The younger detective puts the card above his desk next to the drawing of a square with a diagonal that rookies now cross out without being asked. He reads the P.S. and realizes he hasn't dreamed the corridor in weeks. He sleeps and is surprised by how simply deep can be. The forum, Relay King's Nest, mutates into a repository of good habits. Someone posts a time-lapse of a service crew installing a new panel. Bolts in, torque wrench clicks, sealant laid like calligraphy, label applied with a thumb that knows where pride lives. Another user posts a poem about coins that learned humility. It's not good, but it's honest. A maintenance supervisor pins a checklist that begins with breathe and ends with reported, even if you fixed it yourself. The moderator, who once liked trouble, closes a thread about copycats with a line that gets screenshotted into stickers. We are not narrating hunger anymore. A rumor tries to start, not the dangerous kind, the romantic kind, that Mr. White, the nickname a cousin gave because cowardice prefers laundry metaphors, left a confession hidden under a tile somewhere in the station. People pry at corners with their eyes. The younger detective refuses to dignify the rumor by hunting it. He says to a reporter who wants a quote shaped like a riddle, "We are done rewarding secrecy with fame. If a tile hides a sentence, it is a sentence that wanted to be forgotten." The reporter prints that, which is braver than it sounds. A child tugs his mother's sleeve at the south gate and asks if this is where the monster lived. The mother kneels and points to the camera, the guard, the attendants, the bright square where the blind wedge used to blink. "No monsters," she says. "Just people who forgot to be careful, and other people who remembered." The child asks if remembering is a job. The mother says it is everyone's. The guard overhears, smiles the small smile of a man who earned a line in a story he didn't know he wanted to be in, and takes another step into a posture that reads, "Not today." The prosecutor emails the younger detective a sentence she doesn't need to write but wanted to. The court approved the settlement with language that can be cited by other cities when a seam confesses. He replies with a thank you that feels weak until he sees the attached order, 3 pages that reclassify negligence as a map you can copy and erase. He forwards it to the engineer, to the sociologist with the fear speech, to the mother through a liaison who understands timing, to the rookies who deserve victories measured in policy instead of headlines. An engineer proposes a ridiculous idea that survives because ridiculous is just brave in a new outfit. A sensor that listens for whistled half melodies and flags security, not because a man is guilty of a tune, but because a tune has become a semaphore for attention. The younger detective approves a pilot with a caveat: finish the melody algorithm, teach the system not to panic at concerts. 2 weeks later, the sensor proves itself by paging a guard for a teenager whistling under a sign that said no loitering. The guard arrives and discovers a panel faintly vibrating with a relay running hotter than specs. The whistle wasn't a villain. It was a coincidence that led a human to a seam before it became a story. The team logs the save and laughs at their own superstition. They keep the sensor anyway. Superstition that fixes things is just intuition with a toolkit. The corridor hosts a tiny ritual at midnight on a day not marked on any calendar. A handful of workers, a guard, the younger detective, a janitor, the laundromat survivor, the engineer, and Aya's mother stand under the honest lights. No speeches. A single minute where no one moves. The city makes its normal noises. A train arrives on time. Air presses through vents like restraint learned by a machine. Aya's mother presses her hand to the new plate that refuses to be unscrewed without swearing. After the minute, she says to the plate, not to the people, "Thank you for failing to be interesting." Everyone smiles because that is exactly the right blessing for a door. And elsewhere, away from the south gate, life keeps happening in the untidy cadence cities prefer. A coin hits a counter, a whistle finishes itself. A cap tips not to hide but to greet. People step into elevators that know their place. Habits practice being boring, posters weather and get replaced. The hum remains, honest, a key without dissonance. Tokyo 2001 recedes from headline into instruction, one the city copies onto itself again and again in fonts that do not ask for applause. The younger detective folds his day into a pocket where it won't stab him and walks home through a station that no longer plays its secrets. He passes the map where a head tilt used to be an omen and sees only navigation. He counts 6 seconds for old time's sake. They pass without incident. He lets them go, and in letting them go finds the only closure that keeps working: work.